Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents Shadow Dawn, second in the Chronicles of the Shadow War, by Chris Claremont, story by George Lucas. With a grin of delight, Elora Danan summoned fire. It burst from the ground, a geyser of raw incandescence. Every physical sensation within the forge was transformed. Each breath tasted sulphurous. The furnace heat baking the air. The dark face of the chiseled stone was painted now in hues of scarlet and gold. They paled in comparison to Elora herself as the fire glow danced across skin, the shade of purest silver. She'd spent a week preparing the kiln for her examination. The requisite spells were engraved on her consciousness. She knew what to expect when she began the summoning, but it was one thing to watch when Torquil or his apprentices worked their magic. It was another to try it herself. She was dressed for work. Her tunic of iron cloth was cut big in the body, a cause for some annoyance as she'd worked hard burning off the excess pounds of childhood. She crouched before the fire spout. Tiny sparks flashed all along the molten rock. She had narrowed her eyes despite the dark glasses the rock Nelwyns used whenever they channeled lava. Unexpectedly, a figure slithered up the interior of the small fountain to burst into full view. Its head began as a featureless orb, but as she watched, features appeared. Elora thought it a most attractive creature. She hadn't realized she was looking at a vision of herself. "Hello," she said. The elemental made a gesture with its head that was a match for hers. Its mouth formed a similar reply. But just as the elemental began to speak, a hand snagged Elora and yanked her behind one of the massive shields that ringed the furnace. Hello was what she heard. What she saw was an outrush of raw flame. Her forge was engulfed in elemental fire that scorched the surface of the shields. Then the fire was gone. The forge was plunged into darkness, and the elemental itself had vanished. The vision that remained in Elora's memory was of a creature as startled as she, who'd done harm where none was meant, and had fled in shame and terror. Elora was propelled out into the main forge. "Nothing to say for yourself, then?" Torquil demanded. "I meant no harm." That response won her a dismissive snort from the forge master. "Neither did the elemental," she protested. "Fat lot of good that would have done you. It'd be sorry, you'd be ash. And where'd the fate of the world be then, I ask you, eh?" Elora's answering gaze started as defiance, but turned to something else before Torquil's unflinching glare. She was small for her age. She'd hardly grown these past 3 years, but that still made her a head taller than the average Nelwyn. In Daikini like herself, height was determined mainly in the legs. Not so for the Nelwyns. They were mostly torso. Big shoulders, powerful arms, made them born farmers and miners. Among their number were counted some of the finest artisans in all the 12 great realms on either side of the Vale. Torquil was an elder of the Rock Nelwyns, renowned for the delicacy of his work. "I thought," Elora conceded, "I'd taken the proper precautions." "What's the first rule of the forge?" he demanded. "Fire is our tool, and we its master." "And the second?" "Above all else, see to the safety of the forge." "Which means?" "When faced by the unexpected, stop. Everything. At once." "At least you know the words." "That isn't fair." "Thorn Drumheller placed you in my care. For all that she is the sacred Princess Elora Danan, he told me, she is as dear to me as my own, and I charge you, cousin, to care for her. How am I to say to him, 'Forgive me, but the sacred Princess Elora got herself burned to a crisp'?" "I'm sorry." "I feel much better already." The Nelwyns she'd known of had been a small village of farmers half the world away. The key to their survival was to stay unnoticed. These Nelwyns were different. They made no attempt to hide. They mined and worked metals, as skilled in crafting fine jewelry as they were renowned for their weapons. "Sacred princess you may be, Elora Danan," Torquil continued, "protected against all manner of magic, but still flesh, still blood." "Spare me," she said, and thought with all the asperity a 15-year-old can muster, "I've heard this lecture before, Uncle." She spoke with an unconscious hauteur left over from childhood, when her days had been spent in a tower in the city of Angwin, capital of the Westlands kingdom of the same name. He let her rudeness pass.
I will. Others might not be so forgiving.
Torquil frowned as he ran his hands over the slabs of stone that ringed the pit. One had cracked.
Elora, you were to summon fire in this exercise, not an elemental. The instant it manifested, you should have aborted the spell.
But it was such a little thing, Uncle. I didn't think it could do any harm. I'm certain it meant none.
Well, there's a world of difference between intent and execution. Did Drumheller teach you nothing before he brought you here?
Thorn did the best he could, considering we were pretty much always on the run.
You know, there are 4 great realms to the circle of the world, as there are 4 also to those of the flesh and of the spirit.
Of course, she replied, slipping easily into the role of pupil. The realms of the world are earth, and air, and fire, and water.
We Nelwyns are of the earth.
I know that too. You resonate to its power the same way the Wern do to the realm of water.
But it's fire, Elora, that forms the heart and core of creation. All was void until that first fateful spark. Nothing in our lives is so essential or so deadly as this lesson has shown us both.
I'm sorry.
Well, so am I. Shouldn't have happened. The wards were set right and proper. This was as fine an examination as I've seen.
Until the elemental came.
Aye.
Proof positive, maybe, Torquil, that the enchantment, or whatever it is that makes me immune to magic, also makes it impossible for me to work magic?
No, Elora, as near as I can gauge it, child, you must be some sort of beacon. You draw things to you simply by being, especially fire. Strange, though.
I beg your pardon?
That wee bit. It was too young. Wouldn't have thought to see one without its mam close at hand.
Well, should we do anything about that? I mean, if it's lost.
Not much we can to help. We work with fire, Elora, but there are creatures who dwell amongst it.
I know. I've met them. Thorn's tale of his and Elora's encounter with a school of fire drakes still had the power to thread the older Nelwyn's heart with ice.
So I recall. You saw just now what the smallest of them can do. Only good, solid rock saved us. Even stone burns, child, and I've no desire to see our mountain home turn into a bonfire.
She allowed herself to be convinced, but she didn't much like it. The Mountain Kings made their home in a kind of honeycomb labyrinth. To these Nelwyns, this was paradise, but Elora missed the sun and the star-scattered sky at night. Each household had its own smelter, linked to the mine shafts by broad tunnels. The shafts themselves plunged through the heart of the mountain, following the veins of ore. The refined ore was sold to Daikini strongholds. Payment was by barter, goods for goods. Gold was of little use to those who made their living liberating it from the rock. Torquil cocked his head and said to Elora,
"As the first part of your work was, shall we say, inconclusive, I want to see how much you've really learned at my side."
First, Elora loaded the coal in the furnace. Once the rock was reduced to glowing liquid, she was responsible for the pour. Managing loads that would have been impossible when she had arrived there, Elora did the job, and did it well. That was the core of her pride. Torquil's was in seeing her do so. Their consignment for the day was a dozen ingots, enough to fill the wagon waiting at the far end of Torquil's cavern. Elora clambered aboard and wrestled free the restraining clamps. The wagon began to move. "You're taking me along?" she asked Torquil.
"Well, you've earned the treat,"
was his reply. He knew how difficult it was for her to live underground.
"Keep your hood and goggles on and you'll not be recognized."
As the wagon emerged from the outer cavern, Elora's eyes swept the encampment beyond. The bazaar usually had the appearance of a small city, home to a score of trading houses and hundreds of tents, but this season it was little more than a shadow of its true self. Hardly a surprise, Elora thought sourly, given what's happening in the world. Dominating the campground was the Cascani Pavilion. The Cascani considered themselves traders to the world. It was said they even ventured beyond the Veil. In spirit and occasionally blood, these Daikini claimed kinship with the seaborn Wern, whose race dominated the great deeps as the Daikini did the land. The Cascani assumed responsibility for the bazaar and had established a permanent residence for their factor and a contingent of cavalry. The factor blocked out the configuration of the encampment with space for every tent and access to water and forage. In happier times, Elora remembered a half-dozen more pavilions. This season, she saw only a sad scattering of tents. "Have you ever seen the bazaar so empty, Uncle?"
So deep into the season? Torquil shook his head. Not like this. And you see the way the stock is set?
As if they expect a raid.
More than that. This lot isn't just ready to go. They're eager.
"Do you need me at the tally station?" she asked.
Itching for a stroll?
Oh, curiosity.
Have a care, child, and don't dally.
Is there anything that's needed at home?
Now here's Manya's list, and the household chit as well. Give both to the Cascani factor, Hanre Rutherwood. I'll meet you at his pavilion within the hour. Agreed?
She took the path to the Cascani pavilion. "From Torquil of Good," she said to the sentry, holding out both chit and list.
"Ah," she heard from within as Hanre came out to welcome her. "The master smith's apprentice."
A table inside had been set in buffet style. Called from Elora's side by a subordinate, the factor flipped an apple to her, indicating that his bounty was hers to enjoy. Wrapping her booty in a napkin, she slipped out a side entrance. Her attention was drawn by the tavern across the way. Elora tightened the focus of her outsight to bring both men and conversation into sharp clarity.
"What's the old saying?"
Rumination from a smoker, each phrase broken by a puff on his pipe.
"Wherever a mason rides, the mason rule." "That's daft what you're saying," protested a drover. "They can't conquer everything." "Given it a fair country try. Spent a year or so consolidating their hold on Angwin."
Another voice.
"What really happened there? Does anyone know?"
Elora held herself close. That awful night, her 13th birthday, when the rulers of all the great realms gathered in Angwin to celebrate her ascension, the fulfillment of the age-old prophecy that she would be the savior of this world and those beyond the veil, who would unite all peoples in a lasting era of peace. Among the Daikini, since it was generally assumed that she was one of them, this had been popularly proclaimed the Age of Man. At long last, the youngest race would have its chance to stand beside the other realms as an equal. Instead, an evil sorcerer, known to her only by the name Thorn Drumheller had given him, the Deceiver, had struck down the ruling heads of the realms and cast a dread enchantment over the city. He had reached out to everything in Angwin and stolen the warmth from their hearts, the joy from their eyes, the light from their souls. It was as if winter had come to the city, encasing it in a cocoon of ice. Elora and her companions had barely escaped. They'd been running one way or another ever since.
"But who's to say for sure what happened? Cursed the city is. In a word," mocked the pipe smoker, "Angwin is hell, and all within it are damned."
"The Mason did that?"
"Elora Danan did that."
A new voice, to more mutters of agreement than protest.
"The sacred princess? Hers is a blessing I can live without."
More rough chuckles.
"What's that you say, dog?"
Surprisingly, one among the group stood to her defense.
Didn't get yourself in such a twist, man,"
cautioned the smoker.
"The gal's supposed to be the world's savior, am I right? Yet Tir Asleen was also her home, and it was smashed to dust. Your pardon, but for a battle with a demon queen that came before. Some sorceress name of Bavmorda."
This new voice, speaking in her favor, belonged to the Factor himself.
"With respect, my lord Factor, what of it? Were up to me, I'd think twice about offering sanctuary, that's all I'm saying."
Elora blinked back tears. She'd brought doom to both cities, and been unable to save them. What was I supposed to do? She thought miserably. I was a baby when Tir Asleen was destroyed, and 13 when the Deceiver came for Angwin.
Sod the girl. Tell more of the Mason, someone said. Sweeping across the land they are, muttered the factor. Heard tell, came an interjection. The lord of them Mason, their castellan, what's his name? Modry, said Hanray. Aye, that's the one. Heard tell he set his pet hunters on the girl's tail. The Black Rose? The factor asked. Aye, the smoker announced. They seek the sacred princess. Huh. How's this madness to be stopped? Who's to say it's madness? Offered the smoker. The tales I've heard from those who've been conquered aren't so bad. Where the Mason rule, there is no sorcery. The Vale folk no longer dictate to the Daikini. The world gates to the realms beyond the Vale are sealed, and the earth left for humankind alone. Not possible, snapped Hanray. The Vale folk, they'd never allow it. Mayhap that's what this war is all about. Think, will you? To throw down the gauntlet to the Vale folk. Hanray sounded aghast. The Vale folk are part of the fabric of the world. We depend on them. Is that a good thing? The smoker wondered. They define the fabric of our world and our lives because we allow it. Mayhap the time's come we stood for ourselves, held destiny in our hands. Compelled by the speaker's passion, Elora wanted a look at him. She cast her awareness into the being of the nearest animal. This was another skill Thorn had taught her, how to tap her insight, allowing her to see the world through the eyes of another, in this instance, one of the mares corralled behind her. The animal recognized an intrusion and reacted by dancing. Elora tried to gentle the mare, but she wouldn't calm down. Elora felt a hand on the mare's neck, heard soothing words from the very man she'd sought, a handsome man, thicker about the middle than she would have expected, until she realized that much of the bulk was padding, covered by his merchant's robes. An artful deception. His sleepy eyes missed nothing, but Elora perceived no sorceress abilities. As soon as he turned his back, Elora slipped free of the mare. Her hour was nearly up. The mare started her dance again, but this time it was because the horses of the Cascani patrol were racing in from the encampment's perimeter. Their officer halted before the tavern. Courier, my lord, from Testaverdi, he told Hanray. The city's fallen. Sound officer's call, then. Done, my lord. The air began to fill with the sounds of hurry as the bazaar was deconstructed. It was as though the enemy was just over the horizon, when for all anyone knew, they were still hundreds of miles away. This was the reputation of the Mason. Elora found herself in the path of a charging line of horses. She screamed as they thundered past. Then she was spitting out grit, amazed to find herself in one piece. Torquil and Hanray reached her at the same moment. Elora! Cried the forge master, concern sweeping away the need for secrecy. By my oath! Returned the factor. How far is Testaverdi? She gasped as they yanked her toward the wagon. Far enough, was Hanray's terse reply. Lord Hanray, Elora asked, are the Mason coming? So everyone believes. His attention turned to Torquil. We need to talk, Master Smith. Manya can convene the council. You'll join us for dinner. Perfect. That might even give me time to try to sort out this lot. The factor waved a hand across the encampment. Good luck there, Hanray. You believe most will travel north? It's the harder trail, but the safer destination. Not a few down there, though, might choose the Mason over the Shengwei. And Saint-Denis caught between them both. The factor shook his head as he helped Elora clamber up beside Torquil on the wagon seat. One way or t'other, Saint-Denis has to be next on the Mason list. Move east or west across the continent, eventually you have to face the wall, and that means dealing with the Republic of Saint-Denis. Dinner at Torquil's that night was formal. The children were sent off to bed early, and Elora with them, ostensibly to make sure they were tucked in. It didn't take much insight to figure it was also to get her out of the way. Elora made her way to the dining hall. The last remnants were now being cleared away. The mountain was as much a living thing as those who made it their home. In its way, it breathed and moved. There were always new crannies to explore. One such circled behind the dining hall, forming a tiny gallery. Elora gained a marginal view of the proceedings below. Someone hammered fist on table. Impossible is what I say, a council member named Ragnar bellowed. These days, my friend, that's a word with less and less meaning. It was the Factor's voice. You believe this report then, Hanre? Manya asked. Torquil's wife. She was the head of the council. I tell you, lady, what the courier told me. Can you offer any confirmation? Regarding Testaverde, no. But the world gates closest to Anguin have been sealed. We've been unable to contact any of the houses of Lesser Fairy in the vicinity. The land itself has been strip-mined of magic. Nothing remains. And I say again, Manya, hammered Ragnar, impossible. Will the Vale folk fight that? Asked another of the council. Manya shrugged. There is an opinion among them that if the Daikini desire absolute dominion so badly, let them have it and be damned. A rival opinion posits that the Daikini, already being damned, should be put out of their misery. And us along with them, Manya. We are of the Vale, but we dwell upon the world. What's to become of us? I wish I could say, Simon, she told the much older man. What of Greater Fairy? Testaverde's your answer, I suspect, noted Hanre. A location thick with magic, it was the polar opposite of Saint-Denis, which is devoid of it. Testaverde was built around a world gate, while Saint-Denis stands about as far from one as a body can get. Testaverde was where Daikini and Vale folk could interact most easily. That was considered its greatest defense. But the Mason attacked regardless. Made plain they could, Hanre told the council. Made plain the consequences, and then they offered honorable surrender, which was accepted. That's when the local Factor sent out his courier. What went wrong? Manya asked gently. Damned if I know. Courier said he'd been riding the best part of the night when a terrible light illuminated the sky. When he looked back, the city was gone, and the land scourged. Is that what the Mason do? Manya asked. Hardly. Some force among them apparently steals magic. The room grew still. Finally, a cautious voice broke the silence. And the Mason? How did they benefit from this? They didn't, the Factor answered. Whatever army they sent to seize the city, they lost. What do our shamans say, Manya? Well, something as big as that should have made some impact. It did not, Manya said. That isn't quite true, came a voice close by Elora, as Torquil responded to his wife with a comment intended for Elora's ears alone. She wriggled free of her hiding place. Torquil was lounging across the way on an outcrop of rock. You're supposed to be in bed, he noted. The stones have been twitchy, she said. Why could I sense something that the shamans didn't? Or couldn't? That last is a question. The council needs to be told. Trust Manya, child. She'll make the point. Why can't I? It's better all concerned remain ignorant of your presence. Why? It's clan business. I'm not clan. Terrific. I'm supposed to be the solution here, Torquil. But how can I do that if nobody'll let me? Do you have a clue what needs doing, Sacred Princess? She had no answer. Damn Drumheller, damn him. He dumped me, Torquil. He left me behind without a word. You were ill. I got better. He had responsibilities, and you needed what we have to offer. A place to learn and grow among a family, she finished for him. Is it so bad a thing to have? Torquil, it's something I've wanted my whole life, she cried. But I'm not clan, not family, not really. I have no family, Master Smith. My mother died in Bavmorda's dungeon. I don't know who my father was. All my life I've been passed from hand to hand and mostly brought disaster to everyone. Sometimes I think I'm better off alone. That's not true. Then why did Thorn leave me? He felt it was for the best. Her reply was an obscenity that took them both aback. Before anything more could be said, she pushed past him to her own room. She was sobbing when she pitched herself on her bed. The sobs quickly lessened. Rage gave way to more coherent thoughts, which in turn toppled into a deep sleep. When she awoke, her cheeks were stiff with dried tears. She was ashamed of the way she'd lost her temper. Old habits die hard, she told herself. With her next breath, she smelled smoke.
She followed her nose to behold the tiny fire elemental crouched on the footboard of her bed. The elemental had refined its imitation, and Elora had the disconcerting sense of looking at her own self in miniature. The elemental looked back at her with profound earnestness. She saw its chest rise as it drew in a breath. "No," she raised a hand. "Help!" "What did you say?" Elora asked. "Help!" Its breath brought forth a modest gout of flame. "Offer or request?" The submissive curves of the elemental's body provided the answer. "Help! Help! Help! Help!" Elora donned some clothes. Making sure that her traveling pouches were secure, she grabbed her journey cloak. More than once she'd blessed Thorn for making her traveling pouches. To the eye, they appeared to be ordinary leather bags. The magic of them was that the available space within bore absolutely no relationship to their exterior dimensions. Indeed, since Elora was in the habit of absently depositing items into the pouches, she had no real idea of what they contained. She was out the door before she gave any thought to where the elemental was leading her. It seared a tiny rivulet through the rock ahead, always remaining close enough for Elora to follow. Elora descended through the mine itself into a more profound darkness, with only the flash of the elemental to show her what lay ahead. The elemental finally came to a halt, illuminating the hollow in which Elora stood. She had no idea where she was, save that she stood well within a mountain. "What is this place?" she muttered. The mountain groaned. Elora felt it initially as a tremble beneath her feet. Then came a basso, tearing sound, making her bare her teeth in sympathetic pain. She found herself wedged against the rock. As she rested there, she heard the cries, wails of fear and torment, rage at what had been done, passion enchained, bound tight by spells. She could hear chanting. Whatever the ceremony being performed, the mountain clearly wasn't happy. The elemental had drawn itself into a tiny ball, shining faintly. Elora knew this was as far as the little creature would go. The closer she came to the chanting, the more her concern grew. Even when Thorn had seen that she had no talent for the arts arcane, he had continued teaching her magic. He had taught her to recognize spells and ways to counteract them. She hadn't seen the sense of it. She couldn't battle a mage on his terms any more than she could face a warrior like Corey Bannathon with a sword. "That's the point," Thorn had told her. "You don't face someone like Corey with a sword. You find another way to win. You don't fight a magus with magic, because you can't. But you can use your knowledge to assess his strengths and flaws." Now she recognized the definite beat of the incantation as a standard spell of binding. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. She snaked herself up a slanting rock. Beyond was a cavern. A pool had been opened at one end, apparently filled with liquid fire gold. A gleaming, sinuous shape broke the surface, and Elora bit down hard on her thumb to smother a gasp of recognition. The pool was a construct of fire drakes, kin to dragons or kin to demons, no one knew for sure. They were powerful beyond measure, yet some mage had taken a clutch captive and was working further magics on them. 4 figures moved in ritual unison, a distance from their companion, who stood at the edge of the pool. The celebrant of this obscene rite, he swept a spear-like pole through the molten pond and up, etching sigils, symbols of raw fire, into the very air. With blood from her thumb, Elora daubed sigils of her own on the rock beneath her. The summoning sigil and her blood should bring the elemental to her. The others in their prison wouldn't hear the call, and the celebrants were too caught up in their own frenzy to notice, or so she hoped. A heartbeat later, the elemental came. "I should have known you from the start," she said softly, but she'd never seen a young fire drake, much less a newborn, and at this stage it seemed like the lesser elementals she and the Rock Nelwyn had often encountered. She covered the sigil with her right hand. The infant's warmth spread throughout her body. At the same time, Elora released an aspect of her own spirit into the fire drake. As the infant slithered through the rock, Elora understood the anguish that drove it to seek her out. The other fire drakes were screaming, hurling themselves against the bindings as they tried to avoid the spear point. Elora had seen world gates before, the doorways that allowed transit through the veil that separated the realm of the world from those of the spirit. As far as she had been taught, they could only be located at the intersections of arcane energy called ley lines. Supposedly there were none of those near the Rock Nelwyn holdings. Yet here was a sorcerer building one out of thin air. That has to be why he's using fire drakes, she thought. What else could be powerful enough to form and maintain a gate? The question was, how could she save the fire drakes? From that need came an inspiration. The 4 chanters were responsible for maintaining the bindings around the pool. They also helped sustain the gate. Using her insight, she cajoled the infant fire drake to prick one with a needle of white-hot flame. In response, the acolyte fell the merest fraction out of sync with his fellows. She struck the others, enough to put all 4 fractionally off stride. The bindings still held. Only now, those repetitions carried within them the tiniest flaw. Back to the pool she flashed, to strike at it with even more care than she used against the chanters. To those whose senses are acute enough to perceive them, wards appear as globes of shimmering translucence. In reality, they're a woven lattice of energy whose strength derives from the density of the thread count. These wards were near solid, which was why Elora had established a flaw in the chanter's maintenance matrix first. She began to weave most minute strands of the infant's essence into those imperfect threads. Her stitching finished, she smiled wickedly, for this was something she alone could do, as she was immune to magic, and wards had no power to hold her. She sent a charge of her essence along the string of fire she had laid, and poof! The section of ward she had attacked shriveled. The infant hurled itself into the breach, showing the others the route to freedom. Bodies hurtled past, enveloping Elora in a radiant tide of cascading fire gold. There was no way to hide what was happening. Without warning, Elora's material body folded in on itself in its hiding place as the celebrant's lance punched through her fire drake.
Oh, bless my damned soul,
she heard the celebrant marvel as he held the infant fire drake aloft.
What have we got ourselves here?
The small creature spat flame at him, but the celebrant merely laughed. With the fire drake, Elora struggled to reassert control, manifesting eyes to see with, but the image that loomed before them was one she refused to believe. The celebrant of this unholy rite was a Nelwyn. He realized he held far more than a simple elemental.
Well, 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 he repeated. What have we here?
Carrig, called one of his acolytes. Nelwyns, too.
The drakes are away. No matter. They've served their purpose, and this and best of all.
Who are you? Elora demanded wordlessly. Why are you doing this? How can you betray your own kind?
Think themselves safe snug abed in their little rock holes, so sure they was that a gate could be built only where the laws of nature permit. Branded me an outcast for saying different. Manya, she believed, had me banished straight because, she said, the means of sustaining my construct were an abomination.
He smiled.
The plan, he continued, is to corrupt the fabric of the mountains. The Ancient One I summon will drive the fire drakes before it. They'll tear into the mine and the community beyond. That's the idea.
A flick of the wrist launched his spear. The haft exploded as it struck the frame of the world gate, sealing all the sigils in place. The elemental howled, and Elora with it, as their merged body fit the mold laid down for it. The gate was complete. The summoning had begun. Elora heard music. The melody swept out of the world gate and into her soul, drawing forth a vision of herself, the Elora of her dreams. As she watched, the vision of herself began to dance. With every movement, the dance grew more passionate, more enticing.
She didn't know where she was anymore. Trapped on the gate in the infant fire drake, imprisoned in her human body, or dancing before the gate, drawing forth whatever lurked within. Another shape was emerging from the darkness, reaching from across an abyss. Elora had the sense that here was a masculine ideal to match her feminine. She stayed on her side of the boundary, it on the other. This newcomer was initiating steps that Elora eagerly followed. The culmination of their duet would be when it revealed its face to her. When that happened, she knew she was done. "No," Elora said. "I deny this. I deny you." She called for help with every fiber of her being. Something broke open, deep inside herself. Then, as they had before, in Angwin, the mountains answered her. Far beneath Elora's feet, fire stirred. Massive plates of primordial rock shifted, throwing off powerful shock waves that threw all the Nelwyns off their feet. As it twisted, the surface of the world gate cracked. Elora wrenched a portion of will back from her vision self, and in the process drew the newcomer's gaze toward her. She didn't dare look. She saved herself by throwing herself completely into the substance of the fire drake, flooding it with her need to escape. The creature ignited like a newborn star, but nothing happened. The pair of them could not break free. Carrig would not let them. Carrig staggered, looking confused as he plucked at something behind his back. An arrow had struck him. He was turning as the second hit home. He wasn't hurt, but he had been distracted. For Elora, that was all the opportunity she needed. The fire drake erupted from the gate with a fiery joy that set every other sigil blazing as the other fire drakes regained their true form. Simultaneously, Elora cast her own essence through the fire drake into every particle of the gate's substance. The gate was a creation of magic. The core nature of her being could not be leashed by magic, a paradox that could not be resolved. The gate was the one to buckle. With a hoarse yell, Elora found herself back in her body, the force of her re-entry propelling her up into the belly of a daikini looming over her. The pair tumbled to the bottom of the sloping rock. As they fell, she recognized him as the pipe smoker from the bazaar. There was nothing of the merchant about him here. He was dressed for war. "We've got to go!" Elora screamed at the man. Suddenly she felt herself thrown against a wall. Carrig had found them. She struck at the Nelwyn, but she only made him laugh. The daikini lay stunned. Carrig hadn't been as gentle with him. "I should have guessed," Carrig said. "Thou!" She struggled harder, which made him laugh. "Poor little princess," he told her as he shook loose a tanglefoot web to bind her tight. "Who's this, your savior?" He lashed out with his foot. "His colors mock him as Mason, probably seeking to make his name by bringing you hog-tied to his castellan. Sorry, my lad. I have first claim on her." "You have nothing." "Beg to differ, sacred highness." He stole a glance toward the gate. "For thy bride, most dread and puissant lord, I offer thee the heart and hope of the world." "Never!" she cried. He cast the web, but he was too late. In that same moment, Elora Danan cast her body backward into the very fabric of the rock. Thorn had shown her the vast gaps in what she preferred to think of as solid rock, because Thorn could move through them. He'd taken her with him and taught her the trick as well. Now she let herself free fall, because that was the fastest means of getting clear of Carrig's gate. She had no idea of how long she fell, or how far. Without warning, the structure of the crust around her collapsed, and Elora found herself immersed in a current of lava. Screaming inside, she tried to throw herself free, but she was caught in the geologic equivalent of a rapids. Brighter lights appeared within the stream. They moved around her with the careless ease of serpents. It wasn't until Elora's infant companion appeared that she realized who had joined her. "Hello," she heard. She didn't know how to answer. The fire drakes didn't appear to mind. "Hello, hello, hello, hello." With each greeting, a new shape welcomed her and thanked her for their rescue. She understood where they were now, and where the fire drakes wished to lead her. This
was the heart of the world. She remembered the Nelwyn Catechism. The first realm is fire. "It burns!" the fire drakes cried. "We burn! All things burn!" "I must go," she said. She popped out of the ground, past the nearest treetops. Gravity brought her back down into water. She knew she'd reached shore when her head bumped into it. "I'm alive," she thought, and the realization made her giddy. "I'm alive! I'm alive!" Elora decided that her hair would have to go. "It'll be easier to take care of short," she told herself, "and easier to disguise." So, with swipes of her knife, she reduced her childhood pride and joy to a serviceable cut barely the length of her pinky. She treated herself to a final swim, and when she reached the shore again, she gladly took the towel Rule held out to her. The moment didn't properly register. When it did, she let out a screech and kicked away from the bank. The towel flew up into the air, and a pair of claws snatched it up. Elora had the barest sight of an eagle, a moment to recognize it as Bastion, before her body slapped itself noisily beneath the surface. She pitched herself back into the air with a forceful leap, then collapsed to her hands and knees, coughing. She felt the towel across her back as the eagle let it fall. Her vision sharpened to reveal a small man form standing before her. Rule was beside himself with laughter. "Very funny."
"Yes, it is, actually," Rule agreed. "Very."
She cocked a baleful eye in the brownie's direction and stuck out her tongue. Rule stood barely half as high as her knee. He wore 2 swords, wickedly hooked blades carved from the fangs of a death dog. His hair was chestnut. It had been too long since she'd seen her friends. She wanted to hug the brownie, but he was too small. "What brought you here?" she asked Rule. "How did you find me?"
The one is so obvious it doesn't merit an answer. The other? Well, you let out a pretty wild cry when you dropped into that lava stream. Shot Drumheller from his sleep.
"He sent you?"
As fast as Bastion could fly. Figured if he could hear you cry, so could the Deceiver.
"Does Thorn have any news of the Rock Nelwyns? One of their own was trying to open a world gate."
I believe they know that, lass. They had themselves a wild night, but they survived. Their mountains hold. They'll be glad to have you back safe as well.
"What are you talking about?"
"We're to escort you home, Elora Danan, back to Torquil."
"Bollocks! I'm not going back." She rolled to her feet and put a fair distance between herself and the others before they recovered enough to come after her. Bastion swept low overhead. As he passed by, Rule leapt from his perch on Bastion's shoulders to Elora's.
"This is foolishness, girl,"
the brownie said. She peered around to face him. "If this fight's because of me, Rule, I can't stand passively by. I'm not worthy to die for. Not yet."
"Where will you go then, Highness?"
"To Thorn."
"You don't know where he is."
"I'll find him. Though it would be easier were some kind soul to show me the way. Less likelihood of walking into a Mason camp, that's sure."
You bargain like a Cascani."
"I've been taking lessons. Thorn's in Saint-Denis, yes?" Rule nodded before he could catch himself. "Which is where?" He gestured downstream.
"Off there away? That was very neatly done, Elora Danan. I didn't even see it coming."
"Told you I was getting better. To the north of here, then?"
And a bit east, aye. This water'll lead us."
Big mountains gave way to small ones, which gave way to rolling hills. Spectacular forests ended in the first stretch of cultivated land Elora had seen in years. Both she and Rule heard a keening cry from so far on high that the eagle who uttered it couldn't easily be spotted.
"What?"
Rule prompted. Elora completed a slow pivot, every sense alert. The smells were fundamentally wrong for such a setting. The scent of burned things mixed with blood. Death had visited this place, and not long ago.
"What can you see?"
Rule asked, meaning through the eagle's eyes. A blink of the eye was all it took for insight to join Elora's consciousness with Bastion's.
With another, she was back in herself, shaken by what lay ahead. Rule didn't ask for details. "Go around, maybe?" he suggested. Elora shook her head. "Can't. Bastion can't see any other path through the hills." Insight had given Elora a spectacular overhead view of a modestly sized village. Each cluster of homes was arranged so that they formed a defensive position. It hadn't saved them. The assault had been brutal. The stone walls breached by hammer blows, the rooms within consumed by dragon fire. "No sign of siege engines," she remarked to Rule, "nor any residue of spells." "No need for either when you can whistle up a crew of ogres to do your dirty work." "I don't believe it." "Signs are plain, Elora. Ogres and elves working in concert. Ogres breach the walls. Elves conjure the dragon fire. Ogres get to make a meal of whatever doesn't get too cooked." Elora swallowed convulsively. "What do the elves get?" "No more daikini," he said. "Hereabouts, any road." This was a deliberate massacre, Rule. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Can't we be better than that?" "I think, Royal Highness, that's where you're meant to fit in." "Right now, I don't feel up to the job." The river wound around a knob of rock on which had been constructed a 3-story stone tower. Smoke was rising from its chimney. "Help me out, Rule. What can you tell me about the scents from the inside?" 2 ogres, plus 1 of lesser fairy, 2 of greater." "High elves? On this side of the Vale? I wonder what they're doing." "None of our damn business. Let's go." She remained where she was. "I can't turn my back." "On what?" "My instincts." She made her way toward the tower. "What do you plan?" Rule asked. "The lights are on the 2nd floor." "It doesn't mean anything. Stay clear of the ground floor. Ogres like the dark and they don't like heights. Odds are that's where you'll find one or both. Can't magic yourself inside either. Those 3 of fairy would sense it." "Come down from above, then?" He snorted derisively. "You plan on climbing nearly 40 feet? "There are handholds. Bastion," she called with mind speech. "I've attached a line to a grapnel. Can you fly it to the top of the tower?" Bastion swooped down and carried the rope to its destination. She put weight on it. No slippage. In short order, she reached the roof. She stayed still, peering into the stairwell. Flickers of light came from below. An axe from her pouch in hand, she crept down the steps. The darkness was no problem for her mage sight. She picked her way across the floor. The tower had been ransacked. From the top of this landing, she had a moderate view of the next level. No need for mage sight here. Torches and a roaring blaze in the hearth cast more than enough light. 4 figures came to view. 2 were of greater fairy, tall and lean. The high elves, who made up the whole of greater fairy, carried themselves with a natural hauteur. Their aristocratic mien manifested itself as contempt for the figure that lay bound before them. They were no less disdainful of the denizen of lesser fairy who stood with them as their ally. As glorious as the 2 elves appeared, the goblin was their opposite. Goblins were half as tall as a daikini, with faces so hideous that even trolls didn't suffer by comparison. The prisoner was bent back upon himself over an anvil, bound wrists to ankles so that his body was arched like a bow. He was naked save for a loincloth and covered with bruises. Some were fresh, the goblin's doing.
"First he fry,"
the goblin cackled.
"then he die."
"At the proper time," one of the elves chided her. The goblin made a foul noise. "His sacrifice will place our seal on this land and cast it beyond the veil. You may toy with him, so long as you do not inflict any mortal harm. Defy us in this, and his ordeal will pale in comparison to your own." The goblin cringed. Elora had seen and heard enough. This had to be stopped. She was just asking herself where the ogres were when a hand, the size of her head, yanked her from her perch. She landed close by the anvil. The goblin waggled its claws in eager anticipation. The high elves recognized her instantly. One cried, "Kill her!" The other, "No!" That's when Rule started shooting from the embrasure where Bastian had dropped him. It's easy to scoff at brownie arrows. No one, however, sneers at their poisons. One struck the ogre at the top of his spine, and he was dead. Elora used her mastery over fire to smother every flame in the room. She shoved the goblin aside, throwing herself toward the prisoner. The ropes were thick, but her knife parted them with ease. She hauled him next to her. Mage sight was her salvation. She could see, the others couldn't. For a few precious moments, their blindness in the pitch black was absolute. She stuffed her knife into the prisoner's hand, then threw herself toward where her axe had fallen. The goblin snagged her foot, dropping Elora in an ungainly sprawl. With a hoarse cry, the prisoner reared to plunge the blade she'd left him hilt deep in the goblin's breast. Elora yelped as a pair of struggling bodies descended on her. The two high elves were at each other's throats, one as intent on slaying Elora as his companion was in stopping him. Sadly, her defender was the inferior at a knife fight. Even as the girl caught up her axe, the other elf's dagger brought their battle to its end. The victor was poorly placed to parry her attack as she hit him with the flat of the blade. He didn't move again. Elora had forgotten about the last ogre. The ogre grinned in anticipation. There was a distinctive hunting cry, and Bastian flew down the stairway. He was the first to get to the ogre, who flailed uselessly at its tormentor. Elora hooked the ogre's knee with her axe and tumbled the creature onto its back. As the ogre hit the floor, she brought the axe down onto its neck. Now, the battle was truly over. The Daikini prisoner's skin was cold. To Elora's surprise, though, she discovered a heartbeat. She approached the high elf.
Take care, Royal Highness,
Rule cautioned, his bow leveled at the elf. He doesn't look so well, Rule.
He's dying.
Truly,
The elf told her.
you are the destroyer. No. You are the deceiver who promises salvation, yet will bring about the end of us. No. Compared to you, Bavmorda was a blessing.
Those words took his last breath. Elora found a resting place outside for her friends, then returned inside for the prisoner and his belongings.
Do we carry him?
Rule asked. He won't last an hour.
What then?
I can try to help. I've learned from Thorn and Torquil to draw forth the inborn power of all natural things. I can remind a body of when it was whole and healthy.
She reached out to the Daikini, seeking to establish a similar rhythm with him. His heartbeat was fading. Too many demands on resources already stretched thin. So she offered him a measure of hers. She made her pulse beat his, pumping his blood with her own heart. At the same time, she tempered his breathing so that each breath came more slowly and deeply. With his basic conditions stabilized, she turned to his wounds in turn, reminding the torn flesh of what it was like to be whole. What the man's body would have done in days, she charmed it into accomplishing over a single night. Duge Farallon, the Daikini said, bowing elegantly. She returned his smile. I'm Elora. He had height on her, but his shoulders weren't much broader. His body was slim-hipped, and he moved with a lazy ease. His broad brow was topped by curly brown hair, and his mouth was wide. The area around his eyes told her that he laughed easily and well. He was a very nice man, but unmemorable, which made the announcement of his occupation all that more remarkable. I'm a troubadour, he told her. Strangely, Elora found it almost impossible to meet his eyes. By contrast, his stare was disconcertingly level as he surveyed her in a way that turned her hot and cold at the same time. I'm in your debt, Elora, he said. Famous name, that. Popular, too, I'm told. Was a time when every newborn girl seemed to be gifted with that name. And the skin? How about your silence for your life, Master Duguay, in any way that relates to me, and we'll call our debt square? Each morning Elora sent Bastien forth. On the third day, Bastien flashed her a view of a town. A stockade 20 feet tall rose above the ground. The open square inside was dominated by a massive hostelry and fortress combined. "Now there," Duguay muttered, as she described what lay ahead, "is a castle worth the taking. I'm certainly impressed." Elora raided her traveling pouch for a change of attire. Buckskin leggings, gauntlets, a wimple to mask her head. She wound a long scarf over her skull until only her eyes were visible. It was uncomfortable, but preferable to someone catching sight of her silver hair or skin.
Something the matter?
Rule inquired as she tugged at her leggings. "They're tight, Rule, and they've shrunk."
I thought your clothes didn't do that.
"They're not supposed to." "Oh, bother." "Is there any way," Duguay interjected, "I might be of assistance?" "I'm growing."
Out of her clothes,
Rule chuckled. "Aha, it's certainly a different look," Duguay commented as she stepped into full view. "It's necessary." "Well, no need to explain, Elora." "You're the right size for an apprentice. Any problem with hiring on to learn a trade?" She shook her head. "I may draw looks, but no real questions." "Splendid. I'm tired of this load anyway." As befitted her adopted station, she let him take the lead as they made their way through a thicket of tents and stalls to the main gates. The scene was thick with customers. Seeing Elora's interest in some fabric, Duguay stepped into the breach, charming the merchant into lowering the price. Elora couldn't help admiring the troubadour's technique. "He's very good," she observed to Rule.
He smiles far too much.
"A man of good cheer, Rule. Where's the fault in that?"
No, he's a man who's in on the greatest joke ever told, and he's the only one who knows it. There's a difference, and it makes me nervous.
Suddenly her laughter stopped. "On the notice board, Rule. That proclamation." The rectangle was dominated by a sheet of parchment. "In the name of Modri, Castellan of the Maison, a reward of 1,000 gold sovereigns is offered for the rescue and return of our beloved princess, Elora Danan." A description followed. Its key point was that she was silver in color, silver skin and silver hair. She was immune to all spells except this one, cast against her by the deceiver. Where he was concerned, she had no special defenses. The only consolation was that she seemed able to hurt her foe, where others could not. Unfortunately, he now inhabited the body of Castellan Modri, leader of the Maison Thunder Riders. It was hard to do your enemy damage when he commanded the most formidable fighting force in the Daikini world.
You realize, I hope, that this is why Drumheller wanted you to stay with Torquil,
Rule said. "Thank you. I'm not wholly dim." "Hola, Elora," she heard as Duguay rejoined them.
What about him?
Was Rule's final question. She had no answer. Duguay spared the board hardly a glance, but she knew that meant nothing. "Well, I don't know about you, apprentice, but I am tired of the road," he announced. "A few days' rest should set us both to rights." He shot Elora a sideways glance, and for an instant her eyes met his. In that flash, she felt as though she'd just stared into the heart of the sun. She felt a vague mix of exhilaration and danger. "Trust me," he said, and strode right up to the gatekeepers.
Don't,
was Rule's warning. Duguay met the guard's challenge with a smile, and in short order, they were admitted. Of a sudden, there was a riot of sound from within the stockade. Voices mingled with the crash of steel and heavy objects. A cavalry charger galloped past Elora from the opposite end of the bazaar. As it reached the gate, a figure launched itself from the interior shadows. The rider bellowed, the horse screamed, rearing up. As it fell, the rider's assailant flew from the saddle with a fearsome roar. Unfortunately, Elora was right in its way. The pair of them hit the ground. This was no stranger atop her, and no enemy. At least so she assumed, until Rin Taxamanian bared fangs and snarled. Then he heaved her from his path. Rin cast about for an escape route, but a burly armsman took him down with a chest-high tackle. Two of his mates slammed into Rin as the Wern scrambled to his feet. A cudgel rose and fell. Shackles were quickly fastened into place. Dugay's hand covered hers, and Elora felt a flash of agitation at how easily he'd caught her unawares. It was agony to stand by and do nothing while her friend was dragged away. Manacled as he was, Rin still stood taller than many of his captors, tall even for his own ocean-dwelling race. His fur had suffered from the scuffle, stained with what Elora suspected was blood. The Were spanned the gap between land and sea. While they made their settlements along remote shorelines, they were equally at home far out upon the ocean. They could swim underwater for periods that would drown the hardiest Daikini. Damn, she thought as she watched Rin being dragged away. Damn, damn, damn. You were hanging back before, Dugay noted. Of two minds about staying? Nope. Nasty business, that. Yup. He got the message and mentioned no more of it as he led her beneath the main gate. The promise of a performance gained them a cubbyhole for the night and supper. The mattress was clean, as was the floor. Dugay sat Elora in the corner. Please, he said, don't dissemble. I saw that warrant out front, and I have to ask, how many silver-skinned people are there in the world? I haven't met the whole world, have you? Suit yourself, but you can't wander about this fort dressed like that. I can stay here. It won't be doing your friend much good. She sighed. How could you tell? I watch people. From your reactions, that Were was known to you on a more than casual basis. I have to help him, Dugay. I'll best you begin by helping yourself. And there are two ways to hide. Stay so deep within yourself you're never noticed, or grab center stage so flagrantly no one will think of you as a fugitive. And your preference? It's always better to be what people expect. You're apprentice to a bard. Was one of that breed ever shy and unassuming? He had her stripped to the borderline of decency. Then he rummaged in his pack, came up with jars and pots, ointments and pastes. Won't your paint wash off? Some will, others not. That's the key. Apply the makeup in layers, you see? He washed her hair with an unguent that turned it black. He used a pencil to shape her brows in a dramatic sweep, and with paint skillfully disguised her face. Over the rest of her went a subtle base coat, the end result being a woman with exceedingly pale but otherwise normal skin. He produced the costume he wanted her to wear. Might this not be considered a tad gaudy? She wondered. Dugay grinned. You haven't seen me yet. She settled back to watch as he prepared himself for the evening's performance. Dugay was very good. There was no denying that. The dining hall was an imposing space with two hearths. Meals were served on a line of trestle tables and benches. The hall shook with the raucous assemblage, all of whom were in a mood to enjoy the troubadour's songs and stories as serving maids rushed to and fro. After Dugay made his entrance, she kept close by the wall, certain her disguise was a joke. She took advantage of his opening ballad to slink toward the nearest hidey hole. She never made it. He caught her and paraded her before the mob. She thought she would die. At least Rule wasn't here to see this humiliation. She'd cut him loose to find where Rin was incarcerated. Later they'd work out a plan to set him free. Gradually, it dawned on her that no one was paying her any attention. It was a liberating realization, and with it she cast aside much of her reserve. She watched the serving staff. It wasn't as easy as it looked, she discovered, as she found herself drafted into service. "Oh, what's a lovely lass like you doing in a dump like this?" asked a strapping young man. "Why, hoping to meet a wonder such as yourself," she said. A fellow serving maid topped off his mug, and by the time he realized he'd been abandoned, Elora was an entire table length away. "Weren't our fault, what happened," a man declared. "Weren't right, Mog, what they did," countered another. "You saying those poor devils deserved what happened to 'em, Hobie?" Mog cried. "There was children slaughtered in Gantham's Crossing." So, Elora thought, the village had a name. "We lived in peace, our kind and theirs, for as long as always," he continued. Whole world's gone to hell, lamented Morg. We got no hope.
Elora topped off their mugs, allowed herself to drift around the room. She could see how forced the general good humor was. Elora looked for Duguay. Instead, she found the lad who'd made a clumsy pass at her earlier. He said, "Hi." "Hello," she returned. "I'm, Luke John." "Elora." He flashed a lopsided grin. "I know. He's pretty good." He indicated Duguay. "You too, I'll bet." "Thank you. You're very kind." Something wet and cool poked her, and the sad eyes of one of the household wolfhounds gazed up at her. Elora laid her hand on the wolfhound's head. "You've made a friend," the young man said. The hound proceeded to give Elora a thorough sniffing. "He knows who I am," she thought in amazement.
Given his bloodlines, Elora Dannon, hardly a surprise.
Rule's voice mind-speaking inside her head.
These wolfhounds have been bred to sense the difference between good and evil.
"Rule," she said, "I can hear it in your voice. What's wrong?" Aware of her distress, the hound whined. "Anything the matter?" the lad asked. "Come on. You've the look of someone needing fresh air." "Right now I can't. Some other time, maybe. Soon, yeah?" On the parade ground, she cast about for some sign of the brownie. Bastian reached out to her instead. The eagle stood atop a tower that gave him a view of the entire yard. Insight did the same for Elora, through his eyes, and that was all she needed to guide her to her friends. Rin had been locked inside the horse barn, shackled so he could barely stir. All this she saw through Rule's eyes. There were guards at the entrance. "Rin," she called softly with mind speech. A small form dropped next to her from a chink in one of the wall seams.
It's no use, Elora,
Rule said. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Surely he heard."
No doubt.
She fingered his canvas duster. A fresh double line of parallel slashes opened one whole side of it.
I got too close, he said. My mistake.
"He attacked you?"
He was hungry. I was meat. You forget how fast ware can really move. Happily, brownies can move even faster.
"I don't believe this." He nodded.
Ride with me back inside, then,
he said, meaning that she should use her insight to bond her spirit temporarily with his.
But what you find won't be pretty.
She reached out to Rin the moment the Wern came into view. He was manacled in sitting position. "They haven't seen to his wounds, Rule," she said with mind speech. "One's close to festering."
Can you work from here, Elora? I'll go no closer.
There was no resistance from Rin to her incursion, but she pulled back from him regardless.
What?
Rule asked her. "It's not Rin," she said aghast.
Some double, you mean?
No, it is Rin, yet it's not. Rule, it's a spell."
Ah, a very good one it must be for me not to notice.
"I spotted it just as I began to merge with him. His humanity's been stolen and replaced by this brute."
Very sly. Help him, Highness. Then let's get out of here.
She worked on only one wound. It was all she wanted to try until she had a better idea of the spell that held Rin. The yard was silent as she slipped free of Rule's body and returned to her own. Almost none of the windows visible were illuminated. "How late is it?" she asked.
Late enough. We shouldn't tarry.
"You're not going to. One person can help Rin. Someone has to tell Thorn."
Bastian can go. I'll stay with you.
"You have a comprehension of magic that he doesn't. No offense, Bastian," she added hurriedly.
None taken, and she's right. Please don't be foolish,
Rule implored, conceding her victory. "Sooner you're gone, the sooner you're back. We'll be waiting." Bastian swooped to Elora's arm. He extended his wing for Rule, who scampered up. "Fly fast," she told him. "Stay safe."
No less, he replied, than you.
As the eagle swept across the yard, Rule let out a banshee screech. And then she was alone, until a weight pressed against her hip, and her hand, quite naturally, cupped the hound's massive head. Duguay made no comment as she slipped over the threshold and hunkered down into the space he'd left her. Come the morning, she was grateful when he said nothing about the absence of either rule or bastion. The troubadour had news. Dugay's performance had so impressed the innkeeper that in return for a week's run, she had upgraded them to a chamber with space, a window, and an actual bed. By night, the pair of them worked, Dugay entertaining, Elora serving meals. Her days were far from free, for Dugay took her role as his apprentice seriously. Each morning, he would lead her to a clearing. He started her with scales for her voice and exercises for her body, then pushed both to their limits. Elora discovered that she had a voice, and a surprisingly good one. By lesson and example, Dugay taught her how to gauge the mood of her audience and pitch her performance accordingly. At the same time, he made improvements to her makeup, offered suggestions for her costuming. He was talking about lip paint and quickly mixed a color that was both darker and more red than burgundy. "Do you really believe this works?" she asked. "I didn't hear any shouts of discovery." "That's because everyone was looking at you." "I rest my case." The two of them were sharing a seat on a boulder overlooking the river as he drew a brush across her mouth. "I can do this," she told him. "It's my pleasure," was his offhand reply. "Mine, too." The thought popped into her head. He finished her lips, but otherwise made no move, toward her or away. His gaze had to be intense, but Elora couldn't bring herself to lift her eyes to his. He extended a pair of fingers and stroked the tendons of her hand as if they were guitar strings. That was when the dog coughed. The wolfhound sat at a discreet remove, as effective as any chaperone. Dugay patted her hand. "I must say, Elora, you make the most infernal friends." "Being one, Master Farallon," she laughed, "you should know." Where the hound roamed, Luke John wasn't far behind. The young man rambled over to where she sat, Dugay having returned to the fort. "Do you work with dogs?" Elora asked him. "Nah, I'm an apprentice." "Me too." "You'll sing and play someday?" She shrugged. "What about you?" "Scribe, that's me. A sure and elegant hand, my master says." "I'm impressed. What do you write?" They were strolling toward the compound, the wolfhound pacing behind them. He took her hand in his. "Letters, of course. I read 'em also, them that arrive in the post. You know, Elora, my master, he owns books." "Ah." Luke John's master was working in his scriptorium. Elora and Luke John slipped past him into the library next door. Its rough-hewn shelves were lined with parchment rolls, bound books inscribed by hand, plus some printed by machine. None of the titles meant anything to her. Elora slipped her hand along the shelves, occasionally touching a book. One she looked at was emblazoned with a dragon. "Would your master mind me looking at these?" she asked Luke John. Can't figure any reason he'd say no," the lad told her, looking intently into her eyes. Elora's breath turned quick. "He's going to kiss me," she thought. And then he did, very lightly. She was about to kiss him back when they heard the wolfhound growling outdoors. Both youngsters fled. In the foyer, Luke John grabbed a broadsword. The wolfhound stood waiting for them on the porch, eyes fixed on the main gate. Beneath its arch rode a troop of 7 warriors. "Not ours, I'm thinking," Luke John said. "No," agreed Elora. "They're Mason." By sunset, the entire community was abuzz with news of the Masons' arrival. Luke John was booked solid, as the commandant of the compound drafted him to work on communiques to go downriver with the next dispatch rider. Couriers had been sent out to alert Saint-Denis patrols. The stronghold itself was in a heightened state of readiness. All this Elora learned from Saint-Denis troopers, from customers, from strollers in the bazaar. As she roamed the grounds, she saw a crowd gathered in the barn where Rin was imprisoned. It seemed only natural to see what was up. A warder had come over to sluice down both cell and prisoner. That was the occasion for the show.
Rin was trying to evade the tormenting spray. The crowd began to drift on. Elora stepped close.
"Oi, girl! Watch her!"
Called the guard named Marn.
"Leave the poor creature be now."
He looks like he's in pain.
"Well, be better off for him to die anyway, if the claim of them Mason holds true.
What claim?
Some paper or other marks that critter as their property."
The Commandant would honor a Mason warrant?
The soldier huffed.
Not for me to say, missy."
Elora was right up against the bars. She didn't need insight to show that the spell still held him fast.
"Oh, Rin," she keened quietly. "Rin Taxamanyan," she called in mind speech.
Her body saved her, hurling Elora back even as strands of energy erupted from Rin's body to where she stood. The guards saw nothing of these. They reacted solely to Elora as she fell, legs scrambling as she kicked herself out of reach of the tendrils. Most discorporated the instant they touched the iron bars. The 3 that survived were dispatched by the blade she plucked from her traveling pouch. Then Elora collapsed to her knees. It was her own fault, she knew. She should have known the sorcerer would have set tripwires to protect his handiwork. The guardsmen had no chance to react before the danger was past.
"What the hell?"
Marn cried as he sprang to her side.
I'm sorry," she gabbled. "It was my own fault for going too close."
Out of nowhere, hands closed about her shoulders to lift Elora to her feet. It was one of the Mason.
"You've lost your scarf, lass. It'll be my pleasure to retrieve it."
Somehow it had ended up inside Rin's stall. Looking up at the Maizani, Elora had a flash of insight. This warrior desired her. "No," she said flatly. "Thank you."
"Wouldn't allow it any road,"
Marn said, and each warrior took the other's measure.
"Take it here,"
the Maizani said, referring to Rin.
"or on the road. It's of no matter."
"What do you mean?"
Elora demanded.
"Ours by claim, ours by right." "Not if our commandant says different," snapped Marn. "We are Mason. Better to be our friends."
The Maizani still had his hands around Elora's arms, daring her to struggle. Instead, she assumed an air of boredom. The Maizani knew he'd become the butt of someone else's joke. He reacted by shifting once more to the attack. Elora was spun round and lifted off her feet. His lips closed on hers. She didn't respond, and when the Maizani held her away from his face, the self-satisfied smirk on his features was greeted by an expression even more bored.
"You mock me, girl?"
She shrugged.
"Why bother, when you do such a superb job of it yourself?"
"Diseased dog whore," he snapped at her. "I think enough has been said and done this day,"
Marn said companionably.
"Set the lady down and be on about your business."
Elora heard the faint creak of gut and yew that marked a longbow being drawn. The Maizani's eyes moved upward to the hayloft and the archers who'd quietly taken their positions. The Maizani set her down.
"No harm done,"
he said. By sundown, it was the talk of the fort. The Mason patrol couldn't quell the spirit of a young girl. They sat alone at dinner. Elora worked the far end of the room that night. Again she sensed rising despair. Many of these men and women used to deal with the Vale folk on a daily basis. Now that relationship was being deconstructed. Friendships were giving way to active hostility. If magic could be stolen from the world by the deceiver, could impregnable Saint-Denis likewise fall? That was when Elora Danan took center stage. She could no longer stand aside in the face of this growing miasma. She stood glistening in a pool of candlelight, cast in shades of gold, and swept the room with her eyes, waiting for the noise to cease. It was a story from Angwin's past.
It was olden days, when a good and noble people suffered beneath the cruel yoke of a tyrant. No affront was so slight as to go ignored or unpunished. The people endured because they knew no other way to survive. In this time of shadow, against all odds, a simple man strode forth to plant his feet and tell this dread liege, no more.
When the monarch sent a troop to arrest him, he was nowhere to be found. Throughout this land of sorrow, whispers of defiance were heard. An army was sent to discover that they no longer dealt with a man alone. Others had flocked to his side. And so began a war. In the beginning, the rebels had everything to gain, and that gave them courage. After years of struggle, they found themselves with too much to lose, and that made them afraid. So at the last, they betrayed their chieftain. In chains, he was dragged to the place of execution before a massed crowd. They could not wait to see him bleed. Before their eyes, the chieftain was subjected to unspeakable tortures. It was so terrible a sight that some in the crowd cried out in sympathetic pain and horror. Yet the chieftain uttered not a sound. The Lord High Executioner leaned close and whispered, "Beg for mercy, and it shall be yours." And the chieftain spoke in a voice that made strong men weep. A great shadow fell across the square, and every eye looked up to behold on every parapet, every tower, every mountain, dragons. One took its perch directly across from the chieftain. Its eyes gazed into those of this Daikini, and the dragon wept. As the echoes of the chieftain's cry began to fade, that dragon lifted his own face and roared defiance. First one, then the others took up that selfsame cry, a single word against which evil ultimately has no power, nor can tyranny long endure. Freedom. Elora spoke in the barest of whispers, yet every ear took note. She was crouched low, a posture of grief and loss. Suddenly she rose to her feet, giving her utterance added force. Freedom! In the stillness after her shout, there was a sudden creaking and groaning, as if some incredible weight had settled on the roof. A wind swirled past doors and windows. The whole room exploded in applause and cheers, leavened with sighs of relief that it was only a story, and chuckles at how they'd all been spooked by that gust of wind. Elora herself was drenched top to toe. Voices began to chant her name. Elora! Laura! Laura! She couldn't understand why she was sobbing. What did I do? She cried to Duguay. What came naturally, that's obvious, he replied. Do they understand? Some more than others. Jan Mason, they got your message, sure. Left before you finished. She saw that Duguay was right. The Mason were nowhere to be seen. In a flash of intuition, she knew what they were about. She was on the move herself that self-same moment. She dashed for the kitchen entrance, through the door, out the back, up the wall. In no time she reached the roof, but almost came to disaster as one foot found air where it expected shingles. There's a hole in the roof, she told herself stupidly, and to her surprise found 3 more on the other side. They looked like claw marks, the footprints of some giant creature coming lightly to rest. What? She scoffed in silence. Are you going to presume that a dragon dropped in to hear your story? How come no one saw? Her speculations were banished by the clash of steel coming from Rin's cell. Then her eyes turned toward the main gate to find one door wide open. The battlements were without sentries. She heard horses in the distance, more sounds of a struggle. The stable was closer, but she suspected she'd have a better chance catching them at the gate. She used the building as a runway, then launched herself in a leap for the parapet beyond. She made her way along the walkway. Someone had sounded the alarm. She heard a chorus of barks from the wolfhounds, saw people boiling out of the dining hall. Too late, though, for the Mason were already racing for the gate on horseback, leaving the stables afire. Rin was tied belly down across his horse's back, the reins in the hands of the Mezani galloping ahead. She reached the gate and hurled herself for the warrior leading Rin's animal. Before he knew what was happening, he was unhorsed. The challenge now was to get herself and Rin out of the mess. Elora yanked on the reins, trying to turn her mount back into the fort, when the Mason captain loomed up out of nowhere. Elora was struck down to crash in a clumsy heap. By the time Elora struggled free, the Mason were past the tree line. As morning edged night away, Elora sat by herself in the dining hall. Every now and again she would reach a finger through the flame of the candle that stood before her. She thought of dragons, and asked how they could hold a fire as hot as the world's heart within their bellies. How could fire drakes exist, composed of nothing but molten essence? How could she swim with them, yet not be annihilated? Thinking of swimming reminded her of Rin. She ached with the loss of him. She puffed out the candle flame and stepped past the wolfhound onto the porch. "Elora Danan," she heard from behind. "You're dead." "Thank you so much," Elora said to the wolfhound. "You should know better," said the warrior. Elora made a face which she knew the other could not see. "Hoy!" she heard Luke John cry from the commandant's porch. "Watcher there! Put up them swords!" "It's all right," Elora called as the young man's alarm brought an instant response from the guards. "No harm meant." In short order, near a dozen armed men had taken position before her to face Elora and her supposed assailant. "Who goes?" demanded the sergeant of the watch. "Corey Banniffin," said the warrior, "in the service of Thorn Drumheller, himself adjunct to the office of the Chancellor of the Republic of Saint-Denis." She hadn't much changed since Elora had seen her 2 years earlier. Broad shoulders, hair black and cropped close. High cheekbones framed a strong, square jaw beneath a broken nose and wide-spaced eyes, their oval shape marking her as a native of the Spice Lands, though her features were too angular to be mainland Shengwei. Thorn had no notion how one of her race had come to Angwin to meet her doom ages ago in the dungeons beneath the old royal palace. Tribal tattoos marked biceps and thighs, and especially her face behind and above her left eye. The image resembled the facial feathering of some exotic raptor. In her previous life, Corey had been a warrior. While death claimed her soul, the Reaper found it had a challenger for her body. A demon imprisoned in the ancient stronghold. The demon saved Thorn's life and offered to help save Elora's, provided the Nelwyn sorcerer gave life to its own unborn offspring. The child was soul without body. Corey was body without soul. Thorn made them one. "I sent for Thorn," Elora said. "And he sent me, little princess." "You should have been here sooner." So I gather. Or at least sent Bastion and Rule ahead. None of this might have happened." "Bed, girl, now." "I'm not sleepy." "You've a hard ride ahead come morning." "We're going after Rin? I'm ready now." "Rin is my responsibility, girl. I'll bring him home safe." "I'm coming with you." "You'll do as you're told. And don't look so downcast, Elora. You're getting your wish. You're going to Saint-Denis to join Thorn." Corey was gone within the hour. Elora busied herself packing for the coming ride to Saint-Denis, but she wasn't in the mood for sleep. The mare Corey had provided for her wasn't much to look at. Across shoulders and flanks was a network of scars, but there was pride in her stance and a knowingness in her gaze. A few moments later, Dugay Farallon led a mount of his own around the corner of the paddock. "What's all this, then?" she asked the troubadour. "You don't get rid of me that easily, lass." Elora stood before the mare. Blue eyes met brown. "I am Elora," she told the mare. Almost immediately she became aware of the name offered in response. "And you are Windfleet." The horse bobbed her head. She knew the story from both Rule and Frangine. Death dogs had been sent on Thorn's trail. In the fight, the mare was mortally wounded. Thorn brought her back from the brink of death. For a decade, Thorn had roamed the world, taking stock of sites of power destroyed by the cataclysm. Windfleet's healing was the reassertion of his proper role in the shape of things. "I am honored," Elora said. The next morning, as she led her mare from the hitching post in front of the inn, Luke John called her from the porch. "Got to go, I hear." My first solo performance and I'm run out of town," she replied. I brung you something," Luke John stammered. "In your bag already, from my master's archives, with permission." "Where's the puppy?" she asked. Luke John shrugged. Oh, ain't seen him all morning. Say goodbye for me, will you? Elora asked as she climbed into Winfleet's saddle. They had been riding for an hour when they reached the crest of a rise. Duguay called a halt. Well, he challenged Elora, I know Rin's your friend. I know what this means to you. But if you decide you want to go after him, you'll need those others, else we go no further. Agreed? Rule, Elora called in mind speech. Bastion. I know what Corey probably told you. Please, I beg you, let me help. Then her eyes went wide. Oh my, she said, and took a long moment to enjoy the view. Bastion soared to the north and west. Rule was with him. Come, he said. Where, Rule? What's happening?
Stay merged with Bastion. He'll show the way. Be quick, Elora Dannon. Be here by moonrise. Be ready to fight.
Once they gained the track Bastion spoke of, Elora gave Winfleet her head. It proved to be a wild, wonderful ride, even if the young woman spent much of it with her eyes closed. Then, abruptly, Winfleet jerked to a stop. Tension raced through the mare's body, and from there through Elora's. Duguay felt it too. He'd pulled his own mount beside her and drawn his sword. Ahead and above rose a mound. Not impressive to look at, this one possessed a primal weight of spirit. It was one of the sites that had been annihilated along with Tir Asleen on the night of the Cataclysm, as Thorn had discovered. Elora felt forces spiraling up from the base of the mound like wind. What is this place? She asked.
A high tor,
she heard Rule say, and Bastion swung out of a tight circle to perch on a nearby stone. Rule made his way to Elora's shoulder.
A place of gathering,
he finished. Something special about tonight? Asked Duguay.
We're at the midpoint between solstice and equinox. It's a window of opportunity for the casting of major spells, if you've the knowledge and the heart.
Let me guess, Elora noted. Someone up there has both. I see horses in that hollow, Duguay noted. No riders visible.
None alive, leastways,
was the brownie's comment. Mason?
The ones who stole Rin had comrades waiting, and more here were dragged up the slope.
What about Corey? Elora demanded.
She dealt with all the Mason she could find. Then she followed. We've seen and heard nothing since.
Elora swung herself to the ground, leaving Rule behind.
Elora Dannon, he snapped as she tossed the reins to him.
Keep her calm, she said, meaning her mare. And mine as well, small master, said Duguay, slinging his own reins over Elora's saddle horn. With that, Elora was gone, and Duguay by her side. The smell of blood drew her to the first sacrifice. He'd been stripped, but Elora assumed he was one of the 4 Saint-Denis troopers who'd accompanied Corey. He'd been staked head down toward the base of the tor, with his feet directed at the summit. His aspect was due north. Elora assumed that if they circled the tor, they'd find 3 men at the remaining cardinal points. It's called the Blood Eagle, Duguay said. The object is to keep the victim alive until the ceremony's complete. Look at his face. That's a man at peace, not in agony. There were a pair of Mason close at hand, as dead as he, their torturer's tools smashed. One was twisted back on himself. The other was minus his head. Your friend Corey's doing, Duguay reported. She took care of the Mason, then gave this poor devil a quick, clean death. Should we try to find her? She'll be after Rin. Elora's gaze rose up the slope of the tor. That's where to look. Let's go then. Not you, Duguay. There's sorcery afoot here. I have some immunity. He didn't follow. She heard the first scream when she set foot upon the slope. It was a man's voice, cut off. Elora felt something grab at her and lost her balance. She was on her back. A glowing shape leapt from the clouds that swirled round the tor to swipe at her tunic. A glance revealed many glowing shapes racing for the tor's summit. A second creature began its charge, and Elora took a swat at it, only to see her sleeve slashed open and it zooming back to safety. This time, she'd caught a look at her attacker. It was a fairy. All her life, she'd thought them the most inoffensive of beings. The emotion she saw in their eyes now was hatred. A third and fourth broke from the cloud to come at her, but she sprinted uphill. Another scream. She prayed the voice wasn't Rin's. Elora had come better than halfway. The strands of mist had thickened into a solid mass of cloud. She could see more lights as well, each one a fairy, each fairy with a blade. She couldn't retreat now if she wanted to. Her clothes were a shambles, hanging off her body. Now a fairy came in a diving attack. She felt a blow, and then something wet across her cheek. The gash was only superficial. What disturbed Elora was the crazed grin the fairy wore, as it took delight in an act that its kind would have once considered obscenity. Now Elora understood why they'd been tearing at her clothes. Even the shallowest of wounds, in sufficient number, can kill. Rounding a pile of boulders, she crashed into a Mazzani hell-bent on flight. Before he lumbered on, she saw he was beyond the reach of command or comfort. The fairies below turned their full attention to him. They stripped him to the skin, and then they stripped him of his skin. It was hard to watch, unbearable to hear. A spear cast from the summit claimed him. Elora's heart leapt, for she knew only one person with so deadly an aim. "Corey," she whispered, "alive," and she began to run. The summit formed a shallow bowl. It was ringed with circles of stones. The perimeter ring, composed of the smallest stones, marked the rim of the peak. The stones around the bowl were slightly larger, with the primary stones arrayed in a circle about an altar. Those last dwarfed all the rest. Corey was waiting. What's happening?" Elora asked. "I think I'm happier not knowing," was the taller woman's reply. "This had already begun when I arrived." "Makes sense. Begin at moonrise, climax at zenith." Elora turned toward the heart of the stone circles. "I have to go in there." Corey nodded. The altar was where all the elements of the battle crashed together. Elora could make out a glow at ground level, a defensive sphere of energy. Directly above it, the column of fairies rose. They roiled together, forming a shape vaguely human, allowing, of course, for the horns and wings and tail. The figure cried out, a chorus of every creature that composed its being. The fairies were killing themselves in defense of this most holy ground. Within the globe of energy, a sorcerer's last line of defense, was the person responsible for this sacrilege. When Elora started forward, the fairy conglomerate swept an arm across its foe's globe. Rainbow fire exploded on the globe, tendrils striking back at the assaulting arm. Tiny bodies rained down. Elora recognized the tendrils as the same kind that had attacked her. She'd found the sorcerer who'd enslaved Rin. An avenue led to the ancient shrine. Elora set off, approaching the altar with respect. She paused, ignoring, though it was blessed hard, the monstrous creature that loomed above the tor and the now visibly shrunken globe of fire. "Revered heart of grace," she addressed the altar, "I come in peace. I mean none harm. I do none harm. I ask your welcome." Then she breached the sorcerer's wards and passed into the globe. Within crouched a Mazzani woman twice Elora's age. Elora knew that all her efforts were devoted to the maintenance of her wards. The slightest relaxation, and she'd join her comrades. Beside her lay Rin, alive and unharmed. "You've lost, Mazzani," Elora told the woman. "Never. This is their home. Whatever you planned, the fairies want none of it. There's a new order in the world. They have to move aside." The woman's expression changed. "I know you," she hissed. "Yield. This is your companion. That's why we took him. We hope to lure Drumheller to his doom, but you'll do just as well." "I'm not the one here who faces doom." "I have his soul." "And I have you," Elora said. "I can be your salvation." "His life for mine, is that it?" "I'm not the only one you have to deal with, remember? This world gate must be closed. We must limit the access of the Veiled Folk to our world, limit their power over it, over us." "Is that what Modri told you? The spells you cast don't simply seal world gates. They strip the land of its magic and deliver it to him. He's betrayed you.
Liar!
She screamed. The bubble creaked. The Maisani groaned. There's a time for every death, Elora told her. This isn't yours.
You're trying to trick me!
Your heart knows the truth, Elora said. This is wrong, and you should stop. The Maisani's chin trembled, which Elora took to mean assent, for in every other aspect the woman appeared to be carved from stone. With that, Elora simply stood up, bringing the crown of her skull against the energy field. The globe burst with a pop. The creature roared in triumph.
We will have vengeance!
Thundered the great mass of fairies. Elora took a step to place herself between it and the sorceress. This is a place of passion, she told the fairies, but most of all, of peace.
It is not we who have come to desecrate this holy place. We are its defenders, its champions.
And you have done that work well, but the danger is past.
Suppose we say different.
A single voice, a single face emerged from the radiance to stand before the altar. He viewed the scene with a proprietary air that marked his rank. His robes seemed formed of leaves, and his mahogany-colored hair was woven into multiple braids, though his beard hung loose. Elora spied the tiny heads and bright eyes of fledgling birds poking out from its thicket. Such is your prerogative, Elora replied, but that doesn't make it right. I am...
Your name is known, and your claim. Whether we acknowledge either remains to be determined.
As your majesty pleases.
Death has been brought to this sacred place, and foul desecration attempted. Those scales must be balanced.
Too late. Elora realized that the king was passing sentence. A blast of energy ripped forth from him and struck both her and the warrior. The shape of her bones shifted beneath her skin like soft clay. She felt her shoulders compress, then her hips. Her legs came to resemble stilts, and her arms grew much the same. The last was the worst, as flesh and bone were reshaped to bring forth her wings. She found herself wrapped in a cocoon, pliant wings folded across her body. She unfolded herself gracefully to find the king standing before her, hand outheld to help her to her feet. Elora turned her head and beheld the sorceress, who had undergone an identical transformation. Elora watched as her wings unfolded and her feet left the ground. As she rose, a triple column of flash-fire creatures spiraled about her. Elora felt a terrible yearning, and then she rebuilt herself from the inside out, regaining her own shape.
Elora Danan, the king breathed. It is you.
On her knees, she met his gaze.
I am Tyrell.
Majesty, she replied.
My spell did not hold.
None do on me.
You don't sound so pleased.
She flicked her eyes skyward, to where the woman who had once been a mason had joined hands with the other fairies. It would have been nice to fly, just once. What have you done here, Tyrell?
As I said, balancing the scales. A life in payment for the slain.
Why spare her?
She yielded. Rampant slaughter is a Daikini trait, Elora Danan.
What will become of her?
She will serve as our consort. Her children will take the place of those slain, and mayhap her power as a sorceress will help defend us.
She won't be enough.
Shall we then depend on you, sacred princess?
Elora rose. We might help each other. You know of the Saint-Denis stronghold? Tyrell nodded. One way or another, war will come to them before long. Either the Mason or Fairy. Those Daikini are taking a stand to defend your homes as much as theirs. Together we have a better chance against the deceiver than alone.
You could command us to join you, Elora Danan. Such is your right.
I haven't earned that right. He nodded. From beneath his cloak, Tyrell drew his staff of office. Strips of all the woods of the world wound together. He held it parallel to the ground, so that he stood on one side of the altar and Elora on the other. She placed her hands on either side of his. "We speak as Prince Regent of the realm known as Lesser Fairy," Tyrrell said. "For all who swear us true allegiance, we pledge to the sacred Princess Elora Danan our lives, our souls, our most sacred honor. When needed, we shall come. Her battle is ours, as are her foes." "I speak as Elora Danan," she said. "And to you and yours, my lord, I pledge my life, my soul, my most sacred honor. When needed, I shall come. Your battles are mine, as are your foes." "So mote it be," cried the green man, and together they slammed the staff down upon the altar. Silence. The ordinary quiet of a mountain dawn. Emerging from where she'd been watching behind one of the stones, Cori joined Elora. "Rin!" Elora cried. "What about Rin?" She dashed to where the young Wern lay. She lay her hands on his temples. "Cori, his soul is his own again." "A good night for us all around, then." "What should we do?" "Sleep's the best thing for now. Rin should come through fine." "Who knows?" Elora thought. "Maybe we all will." Stretching east and west like a belt across the belly of the continent, the mountains called the Stairs to Heaven formed its literal and mythical summit. The continent's most dramatic feature occurred roughly 2/3 of the distance from Anguin eastward to Shengwei. It was a chain of cliffs that stretched from one branch of the Stairs to Heaven almost all the way to the top of the world. To the Daikini, it was known as the Wall. The wall appeared to be an insurmountable obstacle to travel between east and west. Elora and her companions approached it from the southwest through the mountains and were rewarded with one of the truly spectacular views in the natural world. Saint-Denis stood nearby. What a city! Elora had never seen anything like it. It dwarfed Anguin. What made Saint-Denis unique was the absence of magic within its confines. The influence of the eldritch ley lines was at an absolute minimum there. It seemed an odd location for Thorn to go to ground, considering that his abilities as a mage would be crippled. Then again, since their foe was likewise a sorcerer, perhaps this was the ideal place to make a stand. The group of travelers had ridden hard since leaving the tour to get Rin as quickly as possible to Thorn. They had made their way through the mountains to the carriage route. Once Rin was loaded onto a coach, the journey was easier for him. Cori rode out with the stage. Elora and Duguay then set off on horseback. Their reputation preceded them, and each time they broke their journey, they found growing audiences. By the time they reached the foothills near the city, they had earned a decent sum, even by Saint-Denis' inflated standards. They took the turn-off toward the upper city. After a fortnight on Winfleet's back, Elora became used to the mare's smooth gait. She let her eyes close. She found herself in the grip of a yearning to stretch full length along Winfleet's back. The temptation was strong, but instead of yielding, she spread her wings and leapt for the stars. Not really, of course. She knew that her body still rode the mare. Only in spirit did she soar. It was the most magnificent of sensations. Elora couldn't believe the way she looked, this grandly terrifying form she'd conjured in what had to be some fantastic waking dream. She turned her neck to behold this new self and found a sight to take her breath away. Tremendous wings stretched from her shoulders. Her skin gleamed with iridescence. In it, she saw the reflection of a head shaped like a wedge. Horns curled back from her temples. From their base grew a double line of secondary ridges along her spine, peaking in size at her shoulder blades, then fading away as they descended her tail. She was giddy with the joy of flying. "This is like the story Thorn told," she marveled, "when the dragon brought him to Tir Asleen. Except in his dream, he only got to ride a dragon, whereas I am
Yes, you are, she heard from above and behind. At long last.
A turn of the head should have given her a sight of this new companion, but she decided to reverse their positions so that she'd be on his tail. It might have worked, too, had not the other dragon rolled the other way, the pair of them racing around each other. Elora couldn't remember when she'd had such fun. The sight of the Tor brought her up short. The one sweep of her wings it took her to stop, striking the air like thunder. The structure of the hill below appeared more clear now. A pattern was visible. The altar stood dead center atop the Tor, in a space formed by the intersection of 3 circles, each demarcated by stones. She counted 12 stones in all, set around each circle. Elora beheld another pattern overlaying them, the sense of a 4th circle running through those cardinal stones and enclosing the altar. A sudden swoosh of air heralded the arrival of her pursuer, but as she twisted, she saw only a boy leaning nonchalantly against a stone in the 3rd circle. "I know you," she hazarded, balancing herself atop the other 2 cardinal stones. The faint nod he gave clinched his identity for her. "You're dead," she breathed. "Join me." Kieran Denier held out his hands. He alone among the assemblage at Angwin had stood to her defense. His sacrifice had bought Thorn the opportunity he needed to rescue Elora. "What have you done?" she demanded. "Where am I?" "Where you must journey, Elora Danan, for your own circle to be complete. Don't speak in riddles. It isn't meant to be easy. Some prizes must be won, little princess, and others earned. What do you want from me?" "Your life," was his reply, and he burned from top to toe with the flames of dragon fire. In that terrible moment, it seemed to Elora Danan that Kieran Denier had come to repay her in kind for his life, and in full measure. She tried to fly, but she tumbled to earth, thrown wholly beyond the circles. Kieran didn't look pleased. The perfection of the setting had been marred. She struggled to move. She was growing cold inside, and the only source of warmth was Kieran's burning, outstretched hand. "Why are you doing this?" she cried. "Because I must. You must. We must. I deny this. Elora! I deny you the power to do me harm. Elora!" Again she heard her name, and so did Kieran. "Elora!" Her strength nearly gone, Elora screamed, "Dugay!" To begin, she simply lay where she was, taking stock of a fire in the hearth beyond the foot of the huge bed. The general nature of the room told her she was in a hostelry. Elora was trembling. She didn't want to touch the memories of what had happened. She wanted it to be a dream, yet knew it was not. Kieran was as alive during this encounter as in Angwin, yet she knew he was dead, and with that acknowledgement, she wept for his passing and for the role she had played, however unwitting, in it. "Mama," she whispered, a cry of loss and one of rage at being abandoned. "Papa!" It came to her then that she hated her life and title as the sacred princess. She hadn't accepted until now how wonderful it was to be a part of a family, of a community, as she'd been with Torquil and Manya. She called out to the figure lounging in the armchair beside the bed. "Dugay? Are we in Saint-Denis?" "Safe and sound," Dugay noted cheerily. "And rest assured we're at a fair remove from your mentor Drumheller's residence. Lads may come from far and wide seeking Elora the songstress, but not a princess of any kind, sacred or otherwise. I'll confess, though, that last stretch gave us something of a turn." "What happened?" "Well, we were riding along, thought you might be dozing. Then of a sudden you screamed. Care to talk?" "How'd I get here?" "Dissembler." "No such thing."
"Answer my question with one of your own. What else do you call it?"
He held out a hand.
You've played the slug too long, Elora, my pet. Up with you.
That's mean.
Aren't we all, given spur and circumstance? I'm not the one whose spirit went wandering, Elora. Sometimes answers can't be found, because there are none to be found. Bollocks. Everything has its place and proper purpose. If nothing else in creation holds true, it's that.
No transcendence, Duguay? No dreams? Then why are the circles interwoven?
Surprisingly, he needed no explanation of what she meant. Are they truly, Elora? Or is it just because that's how you want to see them? Myself, I'd rather form circles of my own. Eyes flashed at her beneath hooded brows. Her sensations left her vaguely unsettled. The room's paid for, he went on. But if you want to stay, we'll have to work for it.
I'll be down directly, she said, as soon as I've bathed and dressed.
The establishment was called Black-Eyed Susan's, named for the proprietor. When Elora found out its address was the Street of Lost Dragons, she directed a sharp glance Duguay's way. There was no requirement for Elora to help with serving, but the more she watched and listened, the more she learned. She heard of Thorn's status. The Nelwyn had done well for himself. He had access to the Chancellor whenever required. When the talk turned to Angwin, though, it grew gloomy. A trader was saying, "Whole of Angwin Bay's supposed to be frozen, surrounding countries glaciating. The ramparts are as good as their name for now, holding back the worst of this false winter. But mark my words, young masters, there'll come a time, and soon, when they won't be enough. Summer'll be a memory from the wall to sunset."
From a far distance, Elora heard the drumbeat of fingers on a doumbek establishing a rhythm. Her feet began to move in time to the drum. She sidled into the open floor before the hearth that Susan had cleared for their stage. Duguay took Elora's left hand in his right. He spun her once, twice, a third time, bringing her close as he led her through a fourth and final circle that somehow encompassed the first three, making what had been a solo into a duet. At the end, the two dancers appeared to flow together. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then came applause and cheers. Elora thrilled to what she had achieved. The talk had been of winter and despair. She'd lit a fire, she hoped, would warm them, sustain them. They would need it. Alone in her room, Elora Danan opened the present Luke John had given her. It was a small book of illuminations. On every right-hand page, Elora found the representation of some fantastic creature. Opposite were the arcane symbols for each image. Luke John had included a letter. The book was from his master's collection, given to Elora because his master had little hope of deciphering its contents. He also included a note of recommendation from his master to a colleague at the university. She smiled. Luke John had divined her identity. He was trying to help. "Rule," she called. "Tell me what you make of this." The brownie pursed his lips as she turned the pages.
"That's a fire drake,"
he said, pointing. "So would this be its sigil?" she asked, indicating the symbol opposite.
"I don't know. I'm sorry. I can give it to Thorn,"
Rule suggested. Elora shook her head. "I want to speak to Luke John's professor first."
"You know some of them, don't you?"
"Not some, Rule. One. The symbol Carrick forced me to form." Dominating the city was a massive edifice called the Citadel. One of its towers belonged to Thorn. This was the seat of government. 6 boulevards stretched outward from the Citadel as the spokes of a great half-wheel. Day and night, trolley cars powered by the nearby waterfalls trundled back and forth over the streets. Off to one side of the plaza that fronted the Citadel, Elora spied an island surrounded by a moat. There were structures visible on it, mostly hidden behind trees and shrubbery. She found only one way across to the island, a stone bridge. She made her way to the other shore, only to discover a silver chain strung between stone pillars. She considered stepping over the chain, but after a glance at the carved gargoyles crouched atop the obelisks, thought better of it.
Walk away from here,
Rule hissed in one ear.
now.
Echoed Frangine in the other. Elora didn't pause until she was once more into the plaza.
Have you lost all sense, girl?
Pleased to see you again, too, Frangine. Where did you come from?
Thorn lives here.
The brownie indicated the citadel with his head.
Thorn works here. I live and work with Thorn.
Frangine snapped to his friend.
You let her stroll across that bridge, knowing what was waiting.
What was waiting? Elora asked. Wards?
Passive mainly,
Frangine explained.
reinforced by gargoyles. They woke up when you looked like you were about to stay.
So I felt. Would they have attacked?
Doubtful, given who you are,
Said Rule.
She was in no danger, Frangine. Run up a flag, why don't you?
Frangine's tone was acid.
Reveal her true nature. Save us all a lot of fuss and bother.
What is the matter, Frangine? Elora demanded.
Got time to hear the list? That island doesn't even wholly exist in this plane of being. Supposedly, in its heart is an ancient world gate. No one visits uninvited. Not being attacked brands you for certain.
I understand, Frangine. I'll be more careful.
Elora, ignorance, rather stupidity, is a luxury you can't afford.
She reached into her pouch to find Luke John's gift at hand. To her mind came the vision of the sigil that stood alone. I gave my word, Frangine, she said simply, casting about for the trolley stop. The university was a community unto itself. The professor was in class, but Elora didn't have long to wait.
Aha, Luke John, he mused. I told Luke John's master, Parry, that if he'd send the lad downriver, I'd sponsor him myself.
He'll be honored you think so highly of him, sir.
What do you require?
I ask your help.
Regarding?
The prophecies of Elora, and the nature and truth about dragons, she told him. And this. She set before him the book Luke John had given her. He stared at the book, then at her.
Do you know what you have here?
She shook her head. Luke John didn't say, beyond that Parry despaired of deciphering its contents. The professor chortled.
I'll wager that the one time Parry opened this book, he saw naught but blank pages.
But the pages aren't blank.
You've seen for yourself?
I've seen.
Then, my dear, you are singularly blessed or cursed. It is an encyclopedia of those who inhabit the third circle.
Have you seen it? His mouth quirked ruefully.
I am a scholar, not a sorcerer. Only they can perceive its contents. Only a magus can actually use the summoning sigils.
Setting the book aside, Professor, she said as she did so. What about the rest? He slid a key across the table to her.
You are welcome to my library at any hour.
A long embankment formed the southernmost boundary of the university. Elora could see the sparkling Pascal River. Think they've ever been found? Elora asked no one in particular. Who's that? Duguay asked in return. Startled, Elora stumbled. The troubadour kept her from falling. The dragons. Her smile of welcome was genuine. Street of the Lost Dragons. I wonder, does lost mean missing or doomed? Or nothing at all? Does it matter? It's only a street sign. Just a thought. What are you doing here, Duguay?
Thought we'd go a-wandering, pet.
Asked at Susan's where you were. Got pointed toward the university. It sounds like fun. It was her inspiration to ride the cable car. She snuggled herself down beside the brakeman. I'm Elora, she said cheerily. As the car trundled on its route, they chatted amiably about the city, about politics, about their lives.
Damn daft is what they are,
grumbled the brakeman, referring to politicians. He was a young barrel of a man,
whose compact form made Elora wonder if there was Nelwyn blood in his ancestry. Such occurrences were exceeding rare and actively discouraged by all the races on both sides of the Vale, but they happened. Duguay had a song about two such lovers, doomed, of course. Far sadder was the occasional comment from the audience that they got the fate they deserved. The brakeman's name was Tam.
I mean, he said, it's a big world, isn't it? What's your point, Tam?
Wondered the conductor, whose name was Rico.
Well, how's one government supposed to bind it all together? Well, we don't do so bad, Tam. Moving folks from the Citadel to Wyvelsfield. What you suggesting? We stretch a cable from here to the ocean?
The brakeman found that concept so amusing he nearly choked on his own laughter.
I am saying, the conductor continued, that we started our journeys afoot. We graduated to horseback and discovered how to make boats. We built these trolleys. You may not see how a single state might rule a world, but does that mean it can't be done?
Where's the benefit? Elora asked.
Be nice never again to have to worry about marauding warlords or possibly establish a regular shipping service. According to me ma, had fairies present to bless me at my birth, Tam said. A world that denies us that beauty, whatever else it offers, comes at too high a price.
You two at it again, said a new arrival. He was a daikini of middling height, utterly unassuming. Only his eyes gave him away. They missed nothing. Elora offered her hand and her name. The conductor supplied the response.
This is René Auberjonois, he said.
Constable? Elora hazarded mischievously, to be rewarded with a chuckle and a nod. You two been corrupting miners again? The constable said to the two transit workers.
Pshaw,
scoffed Tam.
We never.
More likely the other way around, Constable, Elora assured him, as you'll see if you come to our show tonight.
Last stop, Rico sang out. All passengers off, please.
For the crew, this also represented the end of their shift. It seemed like a wonderful idea at the time. From the start, though, the mood at Black-Eyed Susan's was jangly, with an undercurrent that made Elora glad the constable had decided to accept her invitation. Then Duguay sang the Doomed Lovers song. The catcalls from the audience were harsher than usual, and that intolerance sent anger coursing through her. Elora's song was a slap in the face to every person there who'd offered a rude remark to Dugay's song. His lovers were doomed, hers defiant. A table of students was responsible for the rude commentary. Vicious glares followed her to the table she shared with the transit workers. Tam was on his feet.
Damn fine, damn fine.
You liked it? Elora asked. I'm not certain like is a word I'd apply to that song, said René, but a powerful performance nonetheless. The students departed. Rico announced, rising wearily, Your pardon, gentlemen, but it's been a long work day and I've bairns a home I'd like to see. No obligations? Elora asked Tam after Rico had departed.
Single man, single life.
He smiled. She smiled back. René smilingly took his own leave. There was no sign of Duguay at closing, not downstairs nor up in the rooms they shared, so Elora decided to walk with Tam partway home. As they passed the Citadel, there were lights at various windows, testifying to those still at work. At the terminus of each cable car line, stairs descended to a level beneath the plaza where a huge arcade connected them all. Their footsteps set up cascading echoes in the silence. Tam told her,
There's a whole rat's nest maze of tunnels down here, so many I don't think they've ever been charted.
Wow, was what Elora said, and then, wow, again, when they came upon the funicular. As with the trolley cars, there were 6 lines, only these were set right beside one another and dropped almost straight down through the floor of the platform. The journey down to the plains was in a tunnel all the way. He was close behind her, on an observation platform cut through the cliff, which offered the most spectacular view of the plains beyond. They held hands on and off. Could they be afraid of what they don't understand? Elora asked, remembering the students who jeered.
Fates forfend, Tam sounded shocked. Why wouldn't that make them just like us? Troll boy, said a voice. You are nothing like us.
Tam spun about. Who? Elora stammered as shapes moved in the gloom.
"They're off from your place," Tam said. "We want no trouble here. This is a public place. All the more reason to enforce civilized behavior, don't you agree? If you and your slut desire to do the nasty, Tammy troll boy, find one of your burrows. You take that back."
Tam took a step forward. Elora swung her leg around, catching Tam behind the knee and dumping into his back, a heartbeat, before a pair of crossbow bolts whizzed past. Tam rolled one way, and Elora the other. She heard a scream from along the vaulting passageway. Then a golden eagle, not Bastion, Elora recognized, but his mate, Anella, swept through the opening in the cliff to strike at one of the bowmen. The would-be assassin collapsed, dead. Another bowman slapped at his cheeks, at his breast. Both Frangine and Rule were formidable archers. A bolt caught Tam in the thigh, and he toppled to the floor. Elora was tackled herself. Her assailant pitched her on her face and straddled her. She couldn't free herself. There was no sign of Anella or the brownies. A shape approached, the student who'd challenged Tam.
"Bitch,"
he sneered. It was his last expression. His head suddenly departed from his neck. Elora and her captor cried out, and then she felt a spray of hot liquid, followed by a cessation of the pressure on her spine. The weight fell one way. She pushed herself the other. Her eyes were only for Tam. He lay sprawled face down, the crossbow bolt sticking from his thigh. She rolled him over. Elora sensed that the bolt had been poisoned. "Frangine, Rule, I need an antidote here."
"There is none,"
was Rule's reply. The brownies stood on the other side of Tam's body. Frangine had emerged unscathed. Beyond them, Cory Banifin emerged into view, sword in hand. To her left strode René Auberjonois. "Tam's dying." "His killers have paid the price," the constable said. "Our friend will not leave this world unavenged." "He won't leave at all if I have any say." She lay her hands around the wound. She began to croon a song of making, casting her insight down through the layers of reality. She pulled the arrow free. Now there was the poison to deal with. Once more she used insight to cast herself from her own bodily casement into Tam's. She pulled a rill of fire from her own arteries and set it loose in his to consume the poison killing him. The natural current of his body swept her straight to the heart. She knew what the heart looked like, inside and out. So it came as no little surprise when she burst onto the starlit expanse of the Fairies' Tour. Shock froze her where she stood. "No," she said. "No, no, no, no." All was as it had been before, with one exception. Now she stood amid the stones in human form, with a dragon waiting for her. The dragon was the personification of every noble word she knew. She had seen him killed. As though that thought was a cue, Kieran Denier's great wedge-shaped head snapped forward. As he moved, so did she, denying every possibility to catch her. "But I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to save Tam's life." She told Kieran so. He wasn't interested. She was the prey, and he the predator. His only goal was winning. Unless she killed him first. "Why are you doing this? Do you want to die again?" she screamed. He looked pleased, but the voice that answered was Dugay Farallorn's. "No!" With that single word, Kieran's mouth opened, and Elora found herself engulfed in flame. There was a roof overhead when she found courage enough to open her eyes. Somehow, during the healing trance, she and Tam had turned themselves around. Now he was on his back, his head cradled in her lap. He breathed with the ease of sleep, as well as he'd ever been. "How long?" she asked. "An hour," Cory replied. "Since the attack." She touched Tam's cheek. "Ah, Tamsin, you sure know how to show a girl a good time." "You're lucky you can laugh," René observed. "Hardly luck, Constable, considering the army I had." Elora fixed an eye on Cory. "How did you know?" "You've me to thank for that,"
said a voice she knew. "There's little that occurs in Saint-Denis I don't know about. That holds even more so for the catacombs beneath my tower." "It's not the way I wanted to welcome you, Elora Danan," Thorn Drumheller told her, as he gathered her into a hug. "But I'm glad you're here." She'd grown since last they met, standing more than 5 feet tall to the Nelwyn's barely 4. Clean-shaven as he was, he looked surprisingly young. Elora knew better. His hair, the color of pale oak, swept straight back from his brow and was held by a clasp at the nape of his neck. As for the rest, Elora was suitably impressed. This incarnation of Thorn Drumheller wore a velvet robe. Around his neck was a chain of office. René took charge of the scene, seeing to the disposition of the bodies. "Walk with me a ways, would you?" Thorn said to Elora. "I think we're secure enough here from prying eyes, or spells. I thought magic didn't work in Saint-Denis. What you did was magic of a sort." "Something happened to me," she said, "in my healing trance." "Ah, I feared as much." She told him of her 2 encounters with Kieran Denier. "I don't know what they signify, Elora. The linkage between spirit and body is stronger in you than in any I've ever known. Yet the deceiver has his hooks deep in me, and now apparently so does Kieran Denier. How can that be, Thorn?" "Blood is the traditional binding element for such things," she snorted. "You mean we're all related? Kieran is dead, but Kieran is also a dragon, and who knows what rules apply to them? In both instances, your spirit left your body. I assume that left you vulnerable to Kieran's power." "How can he have power if he's dead? And don't tell me it's because he's a dragon." "Oh, that might be the case. You know, the dragon that brought me to Tir Asleen was named Callan Denier, and his behavior was just as high-handed." "Kieran has already been killed once, Thorn. Why does he want me to do it to him again?" "Better yet, Elora, why does your troubadour seem able to prevent it?" "I should have joined you in your citadel." "No," Thorn told her. "Kings too often have no contact with the people they rule. Your task is to weave the strands of these separate realms into a single thread. You can't do that without knowing them." "Whether I like what I learn or not?" "What do you mean? Tonight it was Tam those bullies were after. Troll Boy was what they called him." I've heard the term, and I've been inside his heart. I know him, Thorn, as well as I know the constable over there." "In what way?" "Tam is Nelwyn," she said, "as much as René is of the High Elves." René had the good grace not to deny it. "I didn't think it was possible," Elora said to him, "for the races to interbreed." "There's an old saying, Elora," René told her. "Love will find a way." Winter came early that year, far harder than anyone could remember. Elora found a way to meet with Thorn, though not often, and not on any regular schedule. Their rendezvous was the professor's library. "Is the weather the key?" she asked one afternoon. "You tell me," the Nelwyn said. "You're the one who has to provide the answers." "Oh, you'd have done better with Anna Carey in this role," she told him. The moment she mentioned the Princess Royal of Anguin, she regretted it. After the cataclysm, Anna Carey's father established an order of bodyguards to the sacred princess. There would be 12, one for each realm. They would serve for a calendar year. The first selected was his own daughter and heir. In the king's mind, he could have bestowed no greater honor. Anna Carey didn't see it that way. Barely a teenager, she was unable to reconcile Elora's manifestation with the death of her mother and the disappearance of her beloved twin brother, for that had all happened on the terrible night of Elora's arrival. She was damned if she'd serve Elora in any capacity. The next day, she was gone. Anna Carey won a place of honor among the Maison. Their castellan, Modri, desperately wanted to win her heart.
Though she came to love the Mason, Anna-Carry remained a daughter of Angwin. Her father asked her to come home. She agreed. Then came the night of Elora's ascension, and the ensorcelment of not only Angwin, but all the monarchs who'd assembled. As far as anyone knew, Elora Danan was responsible. By rights, there should be a death mark between the two women. The wild card in that deck was Thorn.
Anna-Carry is as fine a general as she is a noble princess,
Thorn spoke with great care, the better to mask his own powerful feelings for her. How noble, Thorn? Elora asked. If she serves the deceiver.
The fates grant we get the opportunity to ask her. Now answer that question about the weather.
Saint-Denis exists on trade, she told him. If storms close down the highways, merchants could be in dire straits.
Ah, that happens every winter.
Not to the same extent, Drumheller.
Ah, you perceive a pattern in these events?
The cold doesn't smell right. There's something rotten to it. The deceiver has hold of the air. Over Angwin, he's created a whirlwind.
Maybe this wind and its storms are his heralds, Thorn suggested.
She began to pace. He isn't real, Thorn. Not as we define it. He has no physical being. He can't even exist among us without a living host.
And for some reason, the Nelwyn said, the person he most desires to play that role is you.
Elora was breathing so hard it hurt. Corey, damn her, hardly more than normal.
Oh, I hate you, Elora grumbled.
You won, Corey said.
Elora sat up.
You didn't fight as hard as you could.
If I had, you'd be dead, Corey replied.
The top floor of the library was ideal for training, even though the noise reached floors below to the professor's office, where he was shaking his bald head, asking himself how he'd been drawn into such chaos.
Well,
Rin Taxamanian called from a safe distance.
After that display, I sure as hell wouldn't challenge either of you. On dry land, anyway.
And in the water? Elora asked him.
Drag you deep and watch you drown.
Elora shuddered. Oh, that's cold, Rin. There was a gauntness to his form. Thorn had worked hard to repair the damage, but true healing would come only with his return to the ocean.
Wern don't fight for fun,
he told Elora. She stripped off her gear, then stepped to the balcony. Rin came up behind her. It must be hard, she said, to be so far from home for so long.
We're a wandering kind, he replied.
No regrets, then?
It's a struggle worth the winning. With friends worth the knowing, what's to regret?
They both heard a shout and peeked over the parapet to see a student disappear into the classroom building.
The Citadel semaphore's busy,
Rin said, pointing westward. I see. More shouts from the yard as every door was flung wide and the entire student body rushed into view.
What do you think?
Rin asked. It was Corey who answered.
The Mason.
It was all the news by breakfast. A delegation led by their warlord, Duguay reported.
Anna-Carry? Elora asked.
The same. Come to discuss issues of mutual benefit.
What could Modry offer that the Saint-Denis would accept?
Survival's always a good place to start.
She was summoned to the door, where she found an official messenger. We have a commission, she announced after reading the missive. An invitation to perform at the gala, welcoming the Mason delegation.
Duguay looked indecently pleased. Where is it? He asked her.
The Cascani Factor's house, in Kinshire, one of the nearby boroughs.
Will we attend, pet?
Duguay, I wouldn't miss this for the world.
Anna-Carry rode with an escort of cavalry. They wore armor. She did not, though she had adopted its jet hues. The years had scarcely touched her, Elora saw through Bastion's eyes. Anna-Carry had rarely smiled when Elora knew her. Now she looked like she'd forgotten how. Black wasn't the color for her, Elora noted. There was too much warmth in the faintly bronzed cast of her skin. The shade reminded Elora of Rin, whose fur was touched with the same autumnal hues.
"Is there something I might help with?"
asked the professor as he came into his study and set a mug of tea before her. Elora let out a yelp. With a tremendous wrench, she severed her mental tie to Bastion. Gradually, she found time to take a breath.
I'm terribly, terribly sorry,"
the professor said. Elora thoughtfully drew her finger around the circle of the mug's condensation.
"What do you see?"
the professor asked her. Earth, air, fire, water, she recited. The great realms of the circle of the world. Beside it, the circle of the flesh. Daikini, lesser fairy, greater fairy, and I'm not sure what else. There's a missing link, and beyond, the circle of the spirit, where the dragons live.
Could they represent your missing link?"
She shook her head. No, dragons are outside all the realities. She sagged back in her chair. Oh, circles are a great image. All I seem to be doing is going round and round in them. She rose and walked along the shelves. Another friend told me a legend of a race called the Malavoy.
Black leather cover,"
the professor called. Got it, she cried. The professor slipped his finger down a table of contents.
"Here we are. What did your friend say about the Malavoy?"
That they could speak firsthand of the dawning of the world.
"They were, it says here, the first of the races to step wholly beyond the veil."
What do you mean, step? As in from the world?
"Could that be why the realms are linked by circles? To imply that their status can change?"
Professor, do you know what's happening along the frontier? Greater fairies been raiding the outland settlements. Suppose conquest is the change of status they contemplate.
"Well, that wouldn't be at all pleasant. The Malavoy are the oldest of the fairy, and they are apparently as feared on their side of the veil as some of the veil folk are on ours. Could they be the progenitors of demons?"
You tell me. You read the language. And so he did, long into the night. Finally he said,
"The Malavoy texts make reference to a world gate, and it's somewhere within Saint-Denis, up here on the plateau. But that was ages ago when the Malavoy were manifest on both sides of the veil."
The ley lines have moved. The gate won't be active, will it?
"I honestly don't know. But there's something else I found."
This volume's binding was torn, and there was water damage.
"See here."
The professor pointed to an illustration.
"What do you make of this?"
A Daikini country dance. What of it?
Look at the border illuminations, Elora. Is that not a world gate?"
The breath went out of her. She snatched up the book Luke John had sent her. The sigil in her volume and the one atop the illumination were the same. The image from Carrig's rogue gate. Is there a name? A reference to any being? She asked.
"There is reference to an otherworldly being, but his role is benevolent, a force for creation."
A name, she prodded.
"He is called the Lord of the Dance. Wait." The professor flipped through the book. "I may have spoken too soon."
How do you mean? The framing illumination was the same, but the scene was the opposite of the one shown before. That had been a celebration. This was one of transcendent horror. Which is it? When I first saw this sigil, the entity it represented was being summoned as an agent of destruction, yet you've been telling me that it works for creation.
Oh, can't it be both?
I don't know.
The references aren't to a single entity. To do his work, the Lord of the Dance needs a partner.
"There you are," Duguay called from the top of the stairs. "I have been looking for you so hard, my pet." His smile was as glorious as a spring sunrise, filling the room with a radiance Saint-Denis hadn't seen since snowfall, and might not ever see again. Elora didn't notice. At long last, she had eyes only for his. Cascani House, as it was called, was chosen for the banquet because it was recognized by all as neutral territory. Anacari had proved to be an utterly charming guest of honor. She sat at the high table with the Chancellor and the Cascani factor. As severe as she'd appeared during the procession through town, she was resplendent this evening. Her hair had been swept back into a glossy fall, and on her forehead was a circlet of pure silver. Her gown was a rich blue. The entire assemblage was on their best behavior, true feelings masked by glib exchanges. Then the household chamberlain appeared, and conversation faded. Duguay led the way, bedecked in tassels and ribbons, but Anacari had eyes only for the cloaked figure that seemed to glide in behind Duguay. At sight of her, Anacari went very still. Only one other figure in the hall noticed. Anacari's eyes lifted from Elora and fixed on that other. In that gaze was a message meant for him alone. It was a smile, and from where he stood, Thorn Drumheller replied in kind. Duguay and Elora had been working with the household musicians. Elora cast the cloak into Dugay's arms and claimed the dance. To watch Elora Danan that night was to behold music made flesh. Then, suddenly the dance was a duet, the two figures playing off each other. Not an eye left the two partners. The moment the music struck its final chord, most of the house was on its feet, clamoring for more. Duguay had the audience entranced. He'd never been better. As he strode off, the applause was generous. Elora didn't move from her place. She sang of dreams, and then the refrain, "We will be free." She sang of dragons, and then the refrain, "We will be free." She sang of hope, and then the refrain, "We will be free." She built to a last crescendo and rose to her feet. "We will be free," she sang with all her heart. The cheers before were nothing. People were on their feet, applauding, whistling, stomping, hollering. At the high table, the Cascani factor was slamming his big hands together. The Chancellor stood more deliberately to offend his guest. Anacari sat a long moment. Then she too rose and offered polite applause. The Chancellor beckoned Duguay and Elora. "A magnificent performance," he told them. "I especially liked your final song." "The Chancellor is too kind," Elora said with a shallow curtsy. Anacari took a slow measure of the girl. "Allow me to present Anacari, warlord of the Mason." Another curtsy, deeper and more formal. "Your Royal Highness," Elora said. An aide whispered in the Chancellor's ear. "Ah, splendid, we're ready." Despite the cold, the windows, which also served as towering doorways, opened. Elora led the small charge, and wasn't surprised to find Anacari close behind. "Tell me, Elora, what's the big surprise?" "Huh, blessed if I know." "Oh!" That cry of surprise proved the first of many, as people rushed to catch sight of the line of torches lighting the way to the waterfalls. The torches reached the base of the wall. Then there was a collective gasp as a second line of torches appeared atop the wall, stretching south and north. "It has to be miles," Elora thought. The Chancellor wasn't done yet, for out across the prairie, colossal bonfires burst into flame. Elora heard a voice begin the closing verses of her song. Another voice joined, and then another, until the entire lawn was filled with her music. "My people have spoken, milady," the Chancellor said to Anacari. "We are a free people, and will remain so evermore. Tell that to your Castellan." The smile Anacari returned was diplomatic. In her eyes, though, was a terrible sadness. "We all have dreams, Chancellor. Come the dawn, however, we must deal with the world as it is." Elora didn't want to leave. The official guests departed, though Anacari decided to stay a while longer. Someone had lit a fire on the promontory, and a small group gathered to watch the lights sparkle atop the cliff. Rin snuggled close to the flames, the first time Elora ever noticed him feeling cold. In all the excitement, no one had seen him clamber out of the lake and hide himself on shore.
"I've been a churl lately," Rin said. "I owe you my life, Elora, and I never made a proper thank you."
"I only wish I could have set things right."
"You can't save everyone."
Her eyes began to flash, and he held up a temporizing hand.
"Rather not everyone can be saved. Is that better?"
"Not really, and you'd better not number yourself among them, do you hear?" His ears quirked, and he went completely still. "Do you hear that?" Elora asked. A cry of alarm brought them both around to behold Rule running flat out toward them.
"Elora!"
he called, and then, louder still,
"Elora Danon!"
a querulous voice inquired.
"The sacred princess? Here?"
"Rule!" Elora cried. "What have you done?"
"Someone answered him," they heard. "Isn't that the singer? Well, what's her name?"
"Her name's Elora! Her name's Elora!" In the meanwhile, Rule had reached Elora.
"Go! Can't you hear that bloody horn? Now go!"
They were on their feet and moving fast. Underlying the horn was the sound of hoofbeats. She would have looked, but Rule shrieked.
"You remember Ganthams?"
"I'll never forget."
"You aren't the only one. The difference is high elves never forgive."
The first horses of the Wild Hunt cleared the boundary wall as Elora and Rin reached the veranda. But these were no horses, with hooves composed of 3 huge claws. Realizing their peril, those still on the lawn began to run. None survived more than a couple of steps. They fell beneath those awful hooves, or the fangs that filled these animals' mouths, or the gleaming crystal blades of the riders. A sword was leveled in Elora's direction. Rin hurled her through the nearest open doorway. Then he turned to face the on-rushing charge. Even as Elora clambered to her feet inside, Rin crashed to the steps. Elora's scream of protest was nothing compared to the one uttered by Anakari. "A sword!" she bellowed.
"The Danon!" one of the riders called out. "Where lies the Danon?"
Elora had been seen. A horse burst through the glass doorway. She had brought her traveling pouches. Now she thrust a hand inside to come up with her long-bladed sword. "Anakari!" she called, and threw the blade to the warlord, while drawing a mid-length blade for herself. Elora was still for a matter of seconds, and that was nearly her last mistake. A warrior aimed his sword at her back, the young woman turning to face him too slowly. Rule's arrow struck at the elf knight from Elora's shoulder, Frangine's from the upstairs landing. The elf flew off his saddle. He struggled up. He swung for Elora, and her blade rose to check him. He was faster than any Daikini, but Elora had honed her skills against the demon warrior, and she quickly finished him. Anakari stood alone on the veranda, straddling Rin's body, her sword whipping through the air against every warrior that attacked her. Within the ballroom was a mad mix of struggling bodies, the clash of blades and fists.
"Mason!"
Elora heard, and saw Anakari's escort charging into the room. The battle dissolved instantly into a myriad individual combats. The Mason were valiant. They were skilled. They were doomed. Cori Banafan saved them. She faced the elves with a sword in either hand. Fast as the elven warriors were, she proved faster. She took so great a toll that the elves had to fall back to regroup. Thorn fought with a quarterstaff twice his height. Frangine kept firing at as many elves as possible, distracting them so that other hands might finish the job. One set belonged to René Auberjonois. His very presence seemed to inspire the elves to a manic ferocity, as though his existence were an insult. "Cori," Elora called in mind speech. "Bring René to Thorn. Stay with them both." This was a royal command, and meant to be obeyed. Trusting the warrior woman to do what was right, Elora turned her attention the other way. "What are you doing here?" Anakari snarled at Elora as they stood shoulder to shoulder over Rin's still form, their blades flashing before them. "I thought you needed help." "Your help, Singer? That'll be the day." How long they fought, neither could tell. Then, disaster. An elf deliberately impaled himself on Elora's blade. He threw her to the lawn. She forced herself to her hands and knees. She felt something light as gossamer fall across her lower legs. An instant later, those strands cinched tight. "I have the Danon!" an elf shouted, dismounting.
Kill the bitch! Shrieked another, still on horseback. That is not the plan, nor the task set before us. From a pouch, the elf withdrew a large gold ring, etched with sigils, and opening it, thrust it toward her neck. She put both hands against the collar, trying to push it away. To her horror, Elora felt the metal soften, sending forth tendrils toward her throat. Elora knew that the moment those strands touched her, her fate was sealed. Brownie arrows bludgeoned the elf on horseback. Elora saw Thorn swing his quarterstaff. The elf's skull broke. Then Corey's blade severed his hands. With a cry, Elora pitched the collar away. The combatants were all scored with blood. About them was the stench of death. None could quite believe it. What? Elora tried again. What happened here? What better way to win a war, Thorn noted, than to strike off your enemy's head and claim their greatest talisman? Murder me, you mean? Anakari asked. You, the Chancellor, the Factor, the Notables? It worked at Anguin for the Deceiver. Why not here as well? Elora broke the bonds that held her. That was a tanglefoot web, René noted. Those can't be broken. It's magic, Corey told him. Can't hold her. René held up the collar. This is magic too. It's a slave ring. It binds the wearer, body and soul. Keep it away from me, Elora cried out. She turned tear-streaked cheeks to Thorn. The wheels have no hub to anchor them, he nodded. And so begin to spin out of control. And that's your role, sacred princess? To hold things all together? Mocked Anakari, who was tending Rin's wounds. There's a pattern to all things, damn it, Elora flared. A structure, an order, I know. You talk like Modri. Listen to him long enough, you find yourself wanting to believe he really does mean best. A little present pain to balance against a future of prosperity. Except he's wrong. The circles interlink because the world is one. Elora blinked and fixed her eyes on Anakari. She quickly stepped before the warlord, and all took note that when she scooped up her long sword and held it at the ready, Anakari made no move to stop her. What have you done? Elora asked. What I'm supposed to, Anakari replied. Find a way to win. She seemed haunted with the realization that she had committed an unforgivable offense. With so many people on the wall, and every eye on us out here, who's to notice what's going on behind their backs? You're talking of the populace, not the military, scoffed René. The army will still be prepared. Thorn agreed. We'd know of any mass troop movements. Who said anything about mass? And who says this has anything to do with Saint-Denis? Elora understands better than I. Saint-Denis is a battle. Modri wants to win the war. How? Elora demanded. He's been drawing all the magic of the world into himself. The best way to do that, he believes... No, Elora breathed, is by claiming the power of the dragons. There won't be a sorcerer who can actively defy him. What's that to do with Saint-Denis? René asked. There is a world gate, Elora said, more ancient than the city. A portal to the realm of the Malavoy, the lords of ancient fairy, who do not come to this earth, as we Daikini, who are holy of the earth, do not go to fairy. The gatekeepers to the circle of the spirit. Where is it? She grasped Anakari. Where's the gate, Anakari? Tell me. I don't know. I didn't want to know. I just wanted the war to end. Modri is a horror, but the Elora Danan I thought I knew was no match for him. I'm sorry, Anakari said, meeting Elora's eyes. I should have had faith. I had none, Elora said, but I learned. She faced the others. Whatever madness Modri has planned, we have to stop it. We need horses. Our mounts are in the stable, Anakari said. Take them. And what of you? Thorn asked, taking her hand. She was sitting on the topmost step, Rin's shaggy head resting on a cloak. I'm not a free agent. Nor is this a hopeless cause.
She smiled. I spoke not of the responsibilities of state, but those of blood. Rin tightened his grip on her other hand.
Carrie, don't do this.
Hush, and don't call me that. Only the one I love can call me that.
Dissembler, Thorn said. As I recall, only your brother could. Mixed blood, Rin said weakly. Don't only live in Saint-Denis. Shamans among the Were knew the coming of Elora Danan would herald a time of change and great danger. Our mother was Weren. A shaper spell was used to cast her in the semblance of a Daikini. Angwin's king never knew that his firstborn was pledged to the Were. Should the prophecy come to pass, one twin would remain on land, while the other would be spirited away to sea, in hopes that whatever fate the cataclysm presaged, one might survive to lead both kingdoms.
You never knew? Thorn asked Anakari. She shook her head. When the Black Rose captured him and enchained his soul, that was my revelation. Wounds to the flesh we don't share, but our spirits. I have to take him home, Thorn. Then I'll see about our destiny. You'd better go. I'll find you again, Carrie. In better days, I pray. They said no farewells, save for a kiss that started small, then blazed with passion. Already mounted, Elora met Thorn at the front and reached down to set him on the saddle before her. 7 of them departed at a gallop, Thorn and the brownies riding with Elora, while Corey, Dugay, and René rode alone. They raced toward the wall. I need your help, Thorn.
Asked and done, child.
The horse is yours. I need to cut loose. He understood her shorthand, and as she cast her insight over the crest of the plateau, he applied his own to their mount, offering guidance. Elora closed her mental eyes on horseback and opened them to find herself staring at a paper-strewn tabletop. The professor had dozed off. Having no time to wake him and explain, she usurped his body. She found his notes about the Malavoy and smiled to discover a map of the city. He'd laid out a grid system, charting the change in aspects over the centuries to determine the likely position of the gate. The answer made perfect sense. She found the worn old storybook the professor had discovered. Its last illustration was of a wedding. As with the others, a world gate formed the frame. A handsome man and a lovely woman danced on its threshold. She sighed as she turned to the earlier images. The final sigil was incomplete, but enough remained for her to determine a significant difference between it and the ones that preceded it. She leafed through the book Luke John gave her until she found the match for the sigil in the storybook, on the page directly following the symbol for the Lord of the Dance, the one that Carrig had etched into his gate. Then, leaving the professor asleep, she returned to the chase. There was quite a commotion at the cable car station. Soldiers everywhere. Rennie's badge got them through, with help from Thorn. They learned that the Chancellor and his party had been evacuated to the plateau. "We've got to get up to the top," René urgently told one of the officers. "When's the next car?" "Regular service has been suspended," was the reply. They made their way across the bustling promenade and were met by Tam and Rico.
"What's all this, then?" Tam inquired. "We in a war?" "They won't let us up top," Rico explained.
"We have to get up top ourselves," said Elora. "How familiar are you two with the layout beneath the plaza?"
"Me, not so much," Rico confessed. "But Tam did a stretch in maintenance and repair."
"Come with us," she said, and no one questioned her decision. They boarded one of the huge freight elevators.
"What you need of me, then, eh?"
Tam asked. "Is there an underground access to the Enchanted Isle?" Elora asked. Rico whistled.
"Supposedly worth a body's life even to set foot on that place."
"Does that mean no?"
"Not quite," said Tam. "There's a tunnel."
"You're sure?" Elora had to know. Otherwise their only way in was over the bridge.
"There's catacombs, you see," Tam explained. "A proper rat's nest if you don't know the way." "And you do," Rennie said. Tam shrugged. I was young, curious. What about all the protections? Give over, Rico, Tam told him. Them's what applies only to pure-blood Daikini, not mongrel mixed bloods like me. The tunnel led them beneath the moat that surrounded the island. At the far end, it opened into a chamber. The gargoyles all lay shattered on the dusty floor. This was as far as Rico decided to go. Elora expected to find something upright, in the manner of the gate that Carrig tried to form. Instead, they came upon the largest chamber, which was circular. They stood above it on a balcony, from which a line of steps in the wall wound around to the dusty stones that paved the floor. No footprints, René said. He's been and gone, Thorn said. He? Elora inquired. The deceiver? I suppose we should be flattered. He thinks so much of this enterprise that he's come on it himself. How could this be? Tam wondered. There isn't any magic in Saint-Denis. There's some, Thorn told him. Sufficient to sustain the gargoyles and the veiled folk who visit, but there's nowhere near the power required to open so ancient a gate. Unless you've spent 3 years amassing the energies of half a continent, Elora said. There is that, Thorn agreed. We have to follow through the gate, Elora said. Is that possible? René asked. We shall have to see, Thorn said. But this is as far as you can go, Constable. And you as well, Tam. What about this one? René gestured to Duguay. He's with me, Elora said. We're together, was Duguay's reply, and his glance at Elora made plain what that meant. I'm ready, Thorn announced. Elora, stand by me, please. Rule, Frangine, stay with the constable. Thorn began a tracing in the air, the symbol Elora had showed him, that of the Malavoy. Energies of scarlet and gold traced the air. Even as Thorn hurried to complete the pattern, that initial burst of fire began to fade. I was afraid of this, he muttered. I can't sustain the manifestation. Elora set her hand on his. Insight merged them into one, and she felt her blood burn as he began again. Together they repeated the pattern. This time the sigil lasted until Thorn was finished, and blazed brightly afterward. Nothing's happening, Elora noted. A key's no good unless you fit it to its lock, Thorn said. He plucked the sigil from the air and tossed it to the center of the room below. Shall we go? He led the way to the circular steps. Elora watched the sigil as they descended. Initially, it rested on the ground without having the slightest effect. Then, things began to happen. At specific intervals along the stairway, Thorn would describe sigils on the wall. The floor began to alter. A darkness spread outward from the key sigil. The floor turned black, then shifted to something more intense. The last step was a small jetty where they could stand. Above them, in a spiral around the room, the secondary sigils seemed to glow from within the walls. The key sigil had sunk beneath the surface, its radiance suffusing the whole pool. Elora didn't resist the impulse to peer into its depths. There was a quality of three-dimensionality to the face that gazed back. She saw another step, shimmering at ankle depth below the real floor. She took that step, and then the one beyond, and so forth, in a steady gait, only to find herself ascending a circular stairway in an identical pool. Elora emerged into a realm of perpetual twilight. Ancient beyond our comprehension, she murmured. Dreamers, seeking the source of dreams. Is this the world that's forgotten how to dream?
Hardly.
The new voice made her jump. A form seemed to glide toward her.
Thou ask too much of senses.
What else have I to go on?
Thou art the Danon.
I'm Elora Danon.
The Danon, yes. Thou hast come.
I'm here, yes. Is this the 4th station on the Circle of the Flesh? Are you the firstborn race of elves that have gone wholly beyond the veil?
We are Malavoy.
In honor, and I hope friendship,
I bid you greeting.
The shape ghosted a smile, revealing predatory teeth.
I've come to ask your help.
That is known to us.
Have I the honor of addressing the liege of this realm?
We are Malavoy.
Is that...
We are. We were. We shall ever be. Thou art the Danon. Thou dost come before us as supplicant, beseeching our aid.
The realms are in danger.
How can the pieces hold fast without a center to anchor them?
I was hoping you could tell me.
And for this boon, what price? Wilt set thy kind, the Daikini, beneath our yoke in perpetuity?
That's the bargain I'd expect from a minor domain of elves.
Such were we once, though our domain was in no way minor.
I thank thee for thy hospitality, dread lord, she said. I'll find my own way home.
12 rings affixed on 3, to be bound entire by 1. That is the scheme and riddle of things, Danon. To thee falls that task of binding. Thou art the key.
So I gather.
We hold forth thy destiny, Danon. Wouldst claim it? Wouldst embrace us?
There was ice throughout her body. She would die here. She would kill. It would be good. Elora descended to the pool and once again found herself climbing an identical set of steps. Thorn and Corey and Dugay were waiting. "Elora Danon," Thorn called. "Thank the blessed you were only gone an instant." "It was longer than that, Thorn." "Drumheller," Corey noted. "Look at the pool. Your sigils changed." "A gift," Elora told them all. "A token of respect. A favor granted against a future favor in return. I've met the Malavoy." Dugay, she noted, had no overt reaction to her news. "You asked their aid?" Thorn demanded. She shook her head. "It assumed I would. It offered me my destiny. I got the impression I was as important to its survival as to the other realms." "And its price?" "The price is too high. We may need that help, Elora." She shook her head. "All the stories used to terrify children, they're all true. The Malavoy are predators. In their prime, they were the embodiment of passion driven by hunger. They want those days again." From Thorn, a sense of shock and horror. "And this is only the gateway," she thought. "Who knows what we'll find beyond?" Without warning, Dugay snapped out his hand to catch Elora's and draw her into a pair of sweeping circles. "This place is death, pet," he told her. "You don't belong." "Where would you prefer?" she responded with a sultry smile, her manner a match for his. "Master Farallorn," snapped Thorn. "Release Elora." Dugay lazily swung her through a pirouette and looked toward Thorn. "You don't get it, do you? Malavoy have no claim on her, nor do you. She's mine. This is destiny." He continued to guide her through turns. "I lead, she follows, we dance. There's the end of it." "You can't do this," Thorn cried out. "It's done." "Wrong," Elora said. She flashed a predator's smile. "It's barely begun." She spun herself into his arms, and it was clear how much difference half a year had made. Height had come to her, and breadth of spirit to match that of her powerful shoulders. The girl had taken her lead from him. The woman faced him as an equal. In a twinkling, the pair of them had spun down the steps to disappear into the pool. With a cry of grief and rage, Thorn plunged after her. Corey followed, her sword ready. They came too late. The princess, the mage, the demon, the dancer, to the summit of creation, the realm of the dragons. In size,
The caldera of this ancient mountain dwarfed even the wall. The four of them emerged to find themselves facing a veritable ocean of sand with jagged escarpments on every side. They beheld desolation. All was ice. The assault had come so suddenly, the dragons had no chance. About the four loomed the entire community of these noble creatures, cast in frozen oblivion. Thorn didn't need to ask who was responsible. Elora didn't seem to care. She was off in a wild leap, Duguay following, the pair of them swirling across the sand. They danced to music none but they could hear. Thorn called Elora's name, but the young woman ignored him. While Thorn watched appalled, these two unleashed the fullest measure of passion. "I know you," Elora cried, "my lord of the dance." "I know you," was his reply, "as I have from the beginning, my lady. I want to dance, Duguay, as we never have before." "To what end, pet?" "I want them to be free. I want Modri dead." "It can't be done." She lost a beat and nearly fell, to find Duguay no longer in her arms, but Kieran Denier, the dragon who had died for her, wearing his human aspect. "Kieran?" she stammered. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a laugh. "For us, especially here, all things are possible. Then save yourselves. We're doing our best. I don't understand. Where's Duguay? What's happening? He's in your arms, as you are in his. But you have thoughts besides, and dreams. They are part of this as well. You shouldn't have died, Kieran." Her voice broke.
All things die, little dancer.
A change of voice, change of figure, with a thick shock of hair and eyes that sparkled. The shape of his bones marked him as Kieran's sire. "You're Callan," she said.
I am Callan.
"I want to stop the deceiver."
And so you must, for much depends on it. A young heart to bear such a burden. Fate does not always choose kindly.
There was sadness in his eyes, and she wanted to tell him everything would be all right. Instead, she put a surge of joy into her dance, whirling him after her in a circular 4-4 pattern. The elder dragon seemed much amused.
The circles turn, Elora, like wheels. That cannot be stopped, but the direction can be changed.
That sounds like something Modri would say.
You are more alike than you know.
Don't be cruel. You're supposed to know everything. How could you let that monster take you by surprise?
Is that what happened here? Truly?
Always questions, always riddles.
Some things are best earned. To bear the title of sacred princess is not necessarily to deserve it. Look about you, child. Tell me what you see.
Desolation. In that moment, it was as though Elora splintered, part of her continuing with Duguay, while a separate aspect stood searching the magnificent forms entombed in ice. She hadn't noticed an underlying sense of tremendous age, a weariness of spirit, beside which the ennui of Malevoy was as nothing. The spirit form of Callan stood beside her, to all appearances a Daikini in middle age. His eyes gave the lie to that illusion. These were eyes that could have seen the first dawn of creation. "No," she breathed, as a sense came to her of what transpired here.
You cannot save what is already doomed, Elora.
"No."
All things have their allotted span. The struggle is not for the lives that are, but for the hopes and dreams that will be. You and Duguay are lady and lord of the dance. You have a purpose. Now that purpose must be chosen.
"Modri!" Thorn bellowed.
"I'm here,"
said the deceiver. In form he remained perfection. A sculpted body, dark hair and darker eyes, every aspect of his being complemented by the abyssal hues of his armor. "Bastard!" Thorn cried. "What have you done?"
"What I swore from the start. I am not the enemy. I am salvation."
"Not from what I see."
Your vision was always limited. Someone must teach the realms their proper place. You, is it? My destiny, Drumheller, my curse. I have fought to bring about this moment, and I will not be denied, the deceiver said. I deny you, Thorn said. What of it? I am Thorn Drumheller, he said, drawing himself up proudly. Leave, the deceiver said, and live. The Nelwyn didn't move, save to give Cori an injunction that she clear away. She didn't listen, of course. The demon warrior let fly a pair of knives and drew her sword. Modri slapped the knives aside and met her with a bared blade of his own. Steel rang, and Thorn had a surge of hope. Then, as if bored, the deceiver sent her crashing to a pile of rocks. Thorn lashed out with all the sorcery at his command. He brought the sand to life to entomb the deceiver, only to watch that prison crumble to nothingness. He made lances of solid air. He conjured creatures. He summoned forth his talent in ways he'd only dreamed. He gave full vent to rage, to grief, to hatred. When he was done, he knew he hadn't won. He'd used all the weapons of his adversary, realizing that his adversary had to know them better, then watched the deceiver emerge from the conflagration. To his surprise, he felt sorry for the man. Here was someone who spoke of doing good, yet to accomplish it embraced the most hideous of powers. Elora and Duguay were dancing still. I knew about the skin, of course, said the fiend, referring to Elora. But what has she done to her hair? Elora Danan, I am so disappointed. No matter. When I have what I require, all that nonsense will be speedily remedied. Do not do this, Thorn begged. If your goals are noble, why not use noble means to achieve them? I tried. They failed. I'm sorry. Elora, cried the deceiver, and if the voice wasn't enough to stop the dancers, the sight of his sword upraised over Thorn's neck was. I am the Danan. Slowly, proudly, Elora turned from Duguay to face her nemesis. Standing in the heart of the caldera, she looked as though she had found her home. Will you never learn? Modri hissed as he strode toward her. This is my chance to set things right. How? The dragons are the dream. Take it away, or place it under proper control, and the realms become manageable. Society will have order. The future will be preserved. What future? Cried Elora. You're talking about another kind of death. I've seen death, girl. This is better. None will resent their place in the scheme of things, because none will have the slightest inkling that something better is possible. Because that judgment requires a leap of imagination that my control of the dragons will deny them. It requires the capacity to dream. I am the Danan. I will fight you. The deceiver caught her by the throat. You are a memory soon to be expunged. Elora heard the spell of dissolution, felt those tendrils reach out from the deceiver's consciousness to hers. She reached past Modri, felt the electric tingle of Duguay's touch. Music swelled in both of them. He led, she followed, with the Castellan between them. Casting the spell of dissolution forced Modri to withdraw inside himself in order to properly wield the necessary powers. He in no way left himself vulnerable. Any overt threat could be dealt with quickly, but there was no danger in this dance. Together, the three of them retraced the steps already laid out by Elora and Duguay. Seemingly, it was a random pattern of movements. Only from a dragon's perspective could the truth be seen. They had marked the floor with the sigil Elora had found at the end of the storybook, crafting a monstrous world gate. As Carrig had etched one symbol as a summons, so was this a banishment. The dancer comes to the world alone. He claims a partner, and the pair of them return to his domain. For Elora, This seemed a sacrifice she was willing to make. As Elora and Duguay repeated their dance, with the deceiver between them, they left a trail of power behind. Its climax would pop the gate open. Modri would be carried with Duguay and Elora to Dugay's domain, there to remain forever. Why is Duguay smiling? She thought. At you, pet, who dares so much and knows so little. See to your friends. I will finish here. What? She stammered. You have a destiny, and I an obligation. I would have died at Gantham's crossing but for you. Does corporeal death have meaning for such as you? The spells those high elves meant to cast would have been unpleasant. Now that debt is paid. In truth, I hold in my arms what was desired from the start. The spell of dissolution has no power over me. You are much desired, my pet, but needed more elsewhere. Go now, quickly. He released her hands and brought Modri around to face him. She watched them twirl away. She turned back to Thorn to find him ministering to Cori. Get to our world gate, she told him. Duguay and Modri were dancing faster. The climax of both dance and spell was near. Something wasn't right. Elora put one foot before the other, wishing for wings to cover the distance to Duguay and Modri more quickly. The dance was interacting with Modri's spell to strip away illusions. It wasn't what Duguay intended. He couldn't help himself. To her horror, Elora realized, he's dancing with Modri the way he would with me. They stopped. Modri raised his head. Only it wasn't his head any longer. The deceiver's mask had been torn away. What Elora beheld was her own face. Older, so much older, not so ready a smile anymore, and lines etched deep. It was a face that had never known physical hardship, whose fiercest struggles had always been on the battlefield of the soul. Win or lose, she had paid a terrible price. It's a lie, Elora wanted to say. What else to expect from a creature called the Deceiver? Yet it explained so much. Knowledge that no one else could have, and the power over Elora herself that came with it. Their eyes met over an expanse of sand. You're not me, was what finally emerged. If I fail, her older self replied, I am. The horror to Elora was that the other woman believed it. I can't let you do this, she said. You can't stop me. The dragon's day is done. Their lives are but shadows for me to claim as my own. I am the sacred princess. Such is my right. Elora searched for Duguay, but the Deceiver struck first. She lashed out at him with energy waves that drained the dancer dry. In a twinkling, Dugay's corporeal host was reduced to a husk, but the Deceiver didn't allow the cord of existence to snap. She held him prisoner while she drew his power to her. Instinct sent Elora into a leaping backward spin into the sigil she and Duguay had wrought. As she landed, she called forth all the dreams she would not allow the Deceiver to steal, and shot them into the ground like a bolt from heaven. All the sigil's elements flared to life, filling the crater with golden radiance. Elora hurled herself at the Deceiver and heaved her within the sigil. Little fool, she heard in her mind. Would you doom us all? The ground began to melt away along the pathways she and Duguay had made, the radiance rapidly arcing from gold to a blue-white glare. You think you've won, the Deceiver snarled, but you have not. You would match yourself against me, Elora Danan. The radiance was eating away steadily at all the ground within the sigil, yet the Deceiver stood as she might on a set of battlements. Learn now how futile is that enterprise. The Deceiver cupped her hands, and a ball of energy appeared. From it,
curled tendrils, one for every dragon. The young woman knew that the slightest touch would mean their doom. They had been encased in ice. This would finish them, steal away the essence of their being as a race to some secret place of the deceivers, to be doled out as she saw fit, or most likely never to be seen again. No more laughter, no delight, no dreams of things that never were. One dragon stood paramount, and Elora knew this was the true form of Callan Denier. "I don't know what to do," she cried. I don't know what to do." She remembered the Malavoy, how it found delight in the thought of killing. She would kill, it told her gleefully. It would be good. "No!" she wept. One of the deceiver's spell strands was reaching for her. In her mind, Elora forged a spear. It came from the forge of imagination, white-hot, a creation to be proud of. A vision of her stood tall within her mind. She looked at each of the dragons in turn, determined to fix their visages in her memory. While she lived, they would not be forgotten. In her imagination, that vision of herself let fly the spear. And because this was the realm where imagination could be made flesh, that spear took tangible form. She and Callan were separated by miles, but that didn't matter. It wasn't the strength of her arm that propelled the shaft, but of her will. Callan lifted his great head to the sky, as did the others, and the dragons cried their defiance, as in the story she'd told. As one, they called out, "Freedom!" And like that ancient hero, they died. There was a light too impossible to be endured. There was the heat of all creation, as an entire generation of dragons was returned to the celestial fires that gave them birth. Elora was not consumed. She felt the deceiver melt away, but knew her adversary would not be beaten so easily. In this place, the deceiver was spirit made flesh. The corporeal form of Castellan Modri was no doubt safely bunkered within Mason territory. With measured tread, Elora crossed that great caldera, now empty. Unsure of what they'd find, Thorn and Corey approached her. They, too, had beheld the deceiver's true face. To Thorn, the sight was a stab through his heart, made worse by what Elora had done afterward. The dragons were the soul of the world. Now they were gone. Elora Danan met them halfway, a vision in silver, as wild and elemental as the first spring of a newborn world. She walked proudly, happily, and on her face was a smile that spoke of possibilities. In each arm, she carried a dragon's egg. The past was done. In her charge was the promise of the bright new future yet to be. This is René Auberjonois. We hope you have enjoyed this production of Shadow Dawn by Chris Claremont. Story by George Lucas. This program was produced by David Rapkin and directed by Lars Hoel. Mix directed by Lars Hoel. Abridgment by Sharon Holland. Shadow Dawn is a production of Lucasfilm Limited. Copyright 1996, all rights reserved. The book Shadow Dawn is available wherever Bantam books are sold. Look for the third book in the Chronicles of the Shadow War, coming soon to bookstores everywhere.